Ark Raiders has been hiding an absurd amount of detailed, layered, and genuinely fascinating lore across its environments, items, and background details, and today I'm walking through 167 of those Easter eggs and hidden story moments that most players have either missed entirely or only half understood. Before I move forward, I'm counting on you to support my channel by clicking that tiny subscribe button so that we can spread these amazing videos to folks like you around the world. Thank you. So here's why this video exists and how I put it together. I've been spending a lot of time in Ark Raiders, not just running extractions, but actually stopping to read things, look at things, listen to things. At some point my notes document got long enough that a video made more sense. When I assembled all of this, the main choice I made was to lead with environmental details rather than audio logs or NPC dialogue, because I personally think the physical world in this game is doing a lot of the heavier storytelling, and that tends to get overlooked. I also reordered some of these Easter eggs so they sit next to the ones that give them the most context. This isn't a strict timeline, it's more like a reading of the world. The language I'm using throughout is intentional too. When I say something suggests or points toward a certain interpretation, I mean it. A lot of this is open to reading. Alright, let's go. Chapter 1. The World Before the Ark. There's something that a lot of players miss on their very first run through the surface zones, and it's not a weapon or a resource node. It's the landscape itself. If you slow down and actually look at the skyline in the northern sections of the map, the silhouettes of ruined buildings don't follow a random pattern of collapse. They follow a very specific blast geometry. The structures that are still standing, even partially, are the ones built with a particular kind of reinforced facade that was common in civic construction in the mid-21st century. This suggests the world above ground didn't just slowly deteriorate. Something hit it fast, and the built environment remembers exactly how. Easter egg 1 is something that hides in plain sight on nearly every major run, but players almost never comment on it. In certain collapsed office buildings, on desks and pinned to cubicle walls, you can find printed calendar pages. These aren't decorative filler. If you check the day and date combinations on them, many of them are set to a Tuesday in autumn. The same rough window of time shows up across different buildings in different zones. One possible reading of this is that the developers are quietly pointing toward a specific moment when the Ark first descended, and that moment was a weekday morning. The implication being that people were at work. People were in the middle of ordinary life. Easter egg 2 involves the coffee cups. This sounds small, but stay with it. In the kitchen areas and break rooms of pre-collapse office buildings, coffee cups are found in two states. Some are clean and upside down on drying racks. Some are still sitting with dried residue in them. Half drunk. The ones with residue in them are clustered near windows and near exterior walls. The ones that were cleaned and put away are found deeper inside the buildings. This spatial distribution points towards something that happened fast enough that people near windows noticed it first, and the people deeper in the building were still finishing their morning routine when whatever happened, happened. Easter egg 3 is hidden in the transportation infrastructure. In the tunnel systems that connect some of the older Haven access points to the surface, there are stretches of old subway tunnel that predate the Ark occupation by decades. On the tiled walls of these tunnels, you can still make out the faded remnants of old public service announcements. Most of them are standard things about emergency procedures, but one particular set of tiles in the northeastern connector tunnel shows a poster campaign for something called the Resilient Cities Initiative. The text on it talks about preparing urban infrastructure for long-term resilience. The dates on that campaign are from roughly 15 years before the Ark arrived. One possible reading is that someone, somewhere, had reason to start thinking about survival infrastructure a long time before the public knew anything was coming. Easter egg 4 relates to the school buildings found in the residential zones. The classrooms in those buildings are detailed in ways that go beyond what you'd expect from a purely decorative environment. The whiteboards still have lesson content on them. The bookshelves have titles you can actually read. But the most interesting detail is the science classroom in the building at the eastern edge of the residential zone. The lesson on the board is a unit on orbital mechanics. Specifically, it covers the math of objects entering Earth's atmosphere from a decaying orbit. The textbook open on the teacher's desk is a graduate-level physics text, not a middle school one. This is an odd detail for a school environment, and it points towards something without spelling it out directly. Easter egg 5 is about newspapers. Scattered across the surface world, especially in newsstands and in the lobbies of old transit hubs, there are copies of newspapers that you can pick up and read. Most players glance at the headlines and move on, but the newspapers are dated, and if you read across multiple issues from multiple locations, a pattern emerges. There's a stretch of about 3 weeks in the papers where the front page stories shift. They go from standard news to coverage of unusual atmospheric phenomena. Then they go to coverage of communications blackouts in certain regions. Then they stop. The last newspapers are from a very short window, and the stories in them are notably vague, using language like unexpected events and precautionary measures. The vagueness itself is a kind of information. Easter egg 6 lives in the hospitals. The medical centres on the surface are among the most detailed environments in the game, and most players go through them quickly for loot. But the patient charts on clipboards in the hallways and rooms contain readable information. The majority of them are mundane, but several charts in the intensive care units have a diagnosis listed that doesn't correspond to any known real-world condition. The code written in the diagnosis field is something medical professionals who have played the game have flagged in online discussions. The closest real analogue is a placeholder code used in emergency triage systems when the cause of injury or illness is unknown or unclassifiable. This suggests that whatever the Ark first did to people, doctors didn't have a name for it. Easter egg 7 is one of the quieter ones. In the residential zones, in the upper floors of apartment buildings that are still accessible, there are children's bedrooms. These are detailed to a degree that's almost uncomfortable. Toys on the floor, drawings taped to walls. What players tend to focus on are the drawings, and some of them are worth looking at carefully. Several of the drawings in crayon and marker on standard notebook paper depict the sky. Not abstractly, they depict something in the sky, circular forms, clustered together, descending. The colour choices are silver and orange. The shapes suggest the Ark units that players fight on the surface today. And these drawings, by their context, were made by children who would have been drawing from imagination or from what they saw outside their window. That distinction matters. Easter egg 8 is found in the veterinary clinics that appear in a few of the commercial zones. These are small, easy to miss, and mostly picked clean of anything useful. But on the wall of the waiting room, in the one located near the old shopping district, there's a framed article. It's a printout of a local newspaper profile about the clinic's head veterinarian. The article is about her work on animal stress responses to unusual electromagnetic stimulation. The context of the article makes it sound like routine academic research, but the specific frequencies she was studying are ones that, if you know the Ark's communication patterns from other law sources in the game, fall within a range that the Ark units use. This is either a very specific coincidence built into the world, or it suggests someone was studying Ark frequencies before the Ark were a known entity. Easter egg 9 is the gym. In the commercial zone, there's a mid-size fitness centre that's been picked over, but still intact structurally. On the walls of this gym are motivational posters, which is normal, but one of them is slightly different from the others. While the rest are mass-produced, this one is printed on slightly different paper stock, and the design is simpler, like someone made it at home and printed it out. The text on it is a quote attributed to no one, just a block of text that reads, "Things come from above, and we are better for being ready." It's the kind of thing that could be nothing, but given what the world became, it reads differently. Easter egg 10 deals with the dogs. There are no living animals on the surface in most zones, but there are traces of them. In the parks and in some of the residential areas, there are leash posts and dog water bowls that are rusted but still in place. What's notable is the scale of some of these water bowls. A few of them are much larger than anything a standard domestic dog would need. Several players have noted that the bowl dimensions match working dog breeds, the kind used in military and government security contexts. The distribution of these larger bowls is not random. They cluster around certain buildings that appear civic rather than residential. This might just be realism in the world building, but it might also suggest that certain buildings had a security presence that was more significant than their exterior implies. Easter egg 11 is about the clocks. Timekeeping devices throughout the surface world stopped at different times, which makes sense given varying power failures and mechanical wind-down. But the cluster of clocks across the central administrative district, which would have been on synchronized network time, all stopped at the same moment. That moment is not on the hour or the half hour, which is when most people might expect a system failure. It's at a very specific, odd minute. Several players have tried to connect this number to other numerical references in the game and have found partial matches in radio frequencies, serial numbers on arc units, and elevation markers on certain maps. One possible reading is that this is the developers seeding the exact same number across different layers of the world so that the moment of collapse is literally encoded everywhere if you know where to look. Easter egg 12 is in the libraries. There's a public library in the residential zone that is large enough to have a reference section, a children's section, and a periodicals archive. The periodicals archive is the interesting part. If you go through the magazine racks, most of them are ordinary consumer publications. But there's a section of academic journals that were apparently left by someone who was using the library as a workspace. The journals are open to specific pages. The pages they're open to deal with topics including long-range objects detection, atmospheric entry physics, and autonomous system decision-making. Someone was researching these things in this library, and they left in a hurry before they could pack up. The question is whether they were researching in preparation or in response. Easter egg 13 is one of the most discussed in the community and still the least resolved. In the underground sections of the transit network, there are maintenance tunnels that branch off from the main corridors and dead end at sealed doors. Most of these doors are clearly utility access points, with nothing remarkable about them. But one of them, in the Western Transit Hub, has something behind the grating that covers its ventilation panel. If you position your character correctly and look through the grating, there's a space beyond it that's clearly been used as a shelter. There are empty cans, a sleeping bag, and on the wall, written in what appears to be a thick marker, is a simple phrase. I counted 43 before I stopped counting. There's no name, no date, no other context. 43 of what is completely open. Easter egg 14 is about the radio stations. There are several broadcast tower locations on the surface that, before the Ark occupation, would have been operational radio infrastructure. In the ruins of one of these broadcast facilities, there's a control room where the equipment is still partially intact. On one of the mixing boards, the channel presets are programmed to specific frequencies. Most of these are standard broadcast frequencies, but two of them are set to frequencies that don't correspond to any known historical broadcast band. They're set to something in the range that modern telecommunications researchers have identified as potentially significant for very long-distance communication, not between cities, but between the surface of the Earth and low orbit. The idea that someone at a local radio station had their equipment preset to talk to something in orbit before the Ark arrived is a detail the game drops without any comment. Easter egg 15 wraps up this first chapter, and it's a detail that takes a while to recognize because it requires having been to multiple zones and paying attention to something structural. In every residential zone in the game, there are buildings that have been converted. You can tell because the floor plan doesn't match the exterior. Residential buildings with commercial-scale electrical panels, apartment complexes with loading docks that were clearly added later, not built in. Office buildings whose lower floors have been converted into living spaces that predate the Ark, not as a response to the Ark, but from before. This points toward a period just before the Ark's arrival, when people were already quietly changing how they lived, consolidating, preparing. Not officially, but personally. The world before the Ark wasn't entirely unaware. Some people were quietly getting ready. Chapter 2. How the Ark first arrived. Easter egg 16 starts with the sky. In outdoor zones, particularly at dawn and dusk when the game's lighting engine is doing its most detailed work, there are faint trails in the upper atmosphere that catch the light at very specific angles. Most players assume these are decorative cloud layers or atmospheric haze, but they have a structure to them. They're parallel, evenly spaced, and they originate from a consistent bearing that doesn't change between zones. This suggests that whatever the Ark came from, they came from a single direction and a single point of origin. The trails in the sky are old, they've been there long enough to diffuse and fade, but they're still geometrically consistent. One possible reading is that the Ark didn't rain down randomly from orbit. They came from a specific place. Easter egg 17 is in the seismic monitoring data. In certain underground facilities, there are old seismic stations whose readout equipment is still powered from the Haven's generator grid. These stations recorded activity continuously, and the printout rolls are still in their machines. If you read the printout data, most of it is routine. Small tremors, geological background noise, but there are spikes, and the spikes follow a pattern that seismologists in the player community have recognized as corresponding not to underground geological events, but to impact events from above. The timestamps on those impact spikes, cross-referenced with the clock data from Easter egg 11, begin slightly before the moment the clock stopped. The Ark was arriving before most people knew to look up. Easter egg 18 is a piece of military hardware. In the ruins of what appears to have been a National Guard or Civil Defence depot, there's a vehicle bay that still has several armoured vehicles in various states of disrepair. Most of these vehicles have been stripped for parts, but one of them still has documentation in the glove compartment. The document is a mission brief, partial and unsigned. The language in it is bureaucratic and abbreviated, but the gist of it involves a rapid response deployment to an unspecified location following an aerial event. The brief is dated, and the date is very close to the time window established by the newspapers and the calendars. What's interesting is that it was written in advance of the aerial event, not in response to it. Someone knew enough to pre-write that brief. Easter egg 19 involves the Ark units themselves. On the chassis of certain Ark machine types, if you're close enough and the lighting is right, there are markings etched into the metal. These are not decorative. They're clearly informational. They use a symbol set that doesn't directly correspond to any known human writing system, but several researchers in the community have noted structural similarities to certain industrial notation systems used in automated manufacturing. The specific symbols appear to denote sequential numbering, and the numbers on the units you encounter in the early zones are not low numbers. They're in the hundreds of thousands at minimum, and in some cases significantly higher. The Ark that players fight are not early models. They are very far along in a production sequence that started somewhere else, at some point long before they arrived here. Easter egg 20 is about the observatory. There's a ruined astronomical observatory in one of the elevated surface zones, and it's one of those locations that looks like a loot spot, but has something more going on. The telescope inside is destroyed, but the observation logs in the office adjacent to the dome are intact. These logs, written by hand in a field notebook, document what the observatory's staff were tracking in the months before the collapse. The language is careful and scientific. The early entries discuss an anomalous signal source. The later entries discuss a cluster of objects. The last entry discusses the decision to file a report with a government science agency. After that, the entries stop. The report was never filed, or if it was, nothing came of it in time. The observatory knew before almost anyone else, and it didn't matter. Easter egg 21 is one that requires cross-referencing two different locations, which is probably why it's rarely discussed. In the military depot from Easter egg 18, there are crates of emergency supply packages stacked and unopened. The manifest attached to these crates lists the contents in detail, including a quantity of a specific chemical compound used in radiation treatment. Now, the interesting thing is that this same compound, listed by the same manufacturer code, appears in the medical supply inventory in one of the Haven's infirmary areas, and the quantities in the Haven's inventory are far larger than what a standard population-level medical supply would require. Someone anticipated a need for radiation treatment at a scale that suggests they expected large-scale exposure events. This is not the kind of supply you order reactively. Easter egg 22 lives in the audio environment. In certain zones, particularly around the older arc impact craters that have been incorporated into the landscape as permanent features, there's an ambient audio layer that most players tune out as background noise. But if you stand at the edge of a crater and listen carefully, or if you use an audio capture tool and process the recording, there are low-frequency components in that ambient sound that have a rhythmic structure. They're not random noise, they pulse. The pulse rate is consistent across different craters in different zones. One possible reading is that the craters themselves are still active in some way, still emitting something, still connected to whatever sent the arc in the first place. The world isn't just scarred, parts of it are still listening. Easter egg 23 is in the clothing and textile details of the surface world. In the ruins of what appears to have been a garment district, there are bolts of fabric and finished clothing items still on racks and in display cases. Most of this is civilian clothing, unremarkable. But in the back rooms of several of these stores, there are uniforms, not military uniforms. Something else. A consistent design across multiple shops, clearly produced for a specific organization. The insignia on these uniforms is a stylized circle with a line through it at a specific angle. That insignia does not correspond to any known pre-arc government or military organization in the game's implied setting. It's something that existed, was being produced in quantity, and has no official explanation. The stores stocking these uniforms weren't the same chain. Someone was ordering them from multiple suppliers. Easter egg 24 is about the animals again, but this time it's birds. In the open sky above the surface zones, there are birds. Most players notice them as environmental flavor. They circle slowly and they avoid certain areas. If you track which areas the birds avoid, mapping it against the zone layout, the empty airspace correlates very closely with locations where arc units are present at high density, or where arc infrastructure of any kind is embedded in the environment. This is consistent with how real animals respond to electromagnetic disturbance. It's a naturalistic detail, but the precision of it suggests it's intentional. The birds don't avoid zones randomly, they're responding to something specific, and the geometry of their avoidance tells you where to look. Easter egg 25 is one that very few players have noticed because it requires going out of bounds in a very specific location. At the edge of one of the northern surface zones, there's a cliff face that overlooks a lower lying area that's technically off the playable map. If you find the right position and look down, you can see the tops of structures that appear to be part of a facility that was cut from the playable area or was never completed. What's visible of this facility suggests it was purpose-built, not repurposed. It has a geometry that's distinct from anything in the playable world. Circular, very regular, with what look like antenna arrays arranged in a pattern that matches the emission geometry described in the observatory logs from Easter egg 20. Whatever this facility was, it was designed to talk to something far away. Easter egg. 26 is about fire. In the surface zones, there are burn patterns in the landscape that are old enough to be part of the permanent geography. Trees that burned, structures that burned, ground that scorched. Most of these are consistent with the kind of wide-area fire events that would follow a major impact or a collapse of the energy infrastructure. But there are some burn patterns that are different. They're not wide area, they're precise, narrow. They follow straight lines across open ground, cutting through obstacles as if the fire were being directed rather than spreading. These directed burn patterns appear to originate from above, not from ground level. Something came down along those lines, cutting paths, and it happened early enough that the vegetation has grown back partially around the edges, but the centre of each line is still bare. Easter egg 27 is in the Children's Museum. There's a natural history museum in the urban zones that, judging by its interior, was partly a science museum for children. In the space section of this museum, there's an installation that would have been an interactive exhibit about orbital mechanics and the solar system. Most of the interactive elements are broken, but the wall panels, which are large printed graphics with explanatory text, are still intact. One of these panels shows a diagram of Earth's orbital neighbourhood with annotations about types of objects that share our orbital space. The educational text is standard, but someone has written in the margin of one panel, in what looks like a docent's or curator's handwriting, a note that reads, "This one is not on the diagram," with an arrow pointing to empty space in the diagram between two labelled objects. Whatever they were pointing to wasn't on any official map. Easter egg 28 is about the arc unit's behaviour around specific materials. Players who have spent significant time on the surface have noted that certain arc unit types stop and pause when they move near certain material compositions in the environment. Specifically, they pause near deposits of a particular mineral that can be found exposed in certain cliff sections and in the walls of older pre-industrial buildings. This pausing behaviour is brief and might be dismissed as a pathfinding quirk. But the mineral type they respond to has a specific property. It's highly resonant at certain electromagnetic frequencies. The same frequencies the game's lore documents identify as significant to arc communication. One possible reading is that arc units aren't just fighting and scavenging. They're prospecting, looking for materials that have specific value to their operation. Easter egg 29 is found in the photography. In ruined homes and studios, photographs are everywhere. Most are personal, family moments, portraits, vacations. But in certain homes, there are photographs taken outdoors, of the sky, at night. These are clearly amateur astronomy photographs, taken with consumer cameras on tripods. The subjects of these photographs include the usual things: the moon, star clusters, occasional meteors. But a subset of these photographs, found in 3 different residential zones, all appear to be from the same general time period based on the photographic style and the sky composition, and they all show the same anomalous object. It's small in the frame, in the corner. Not the subject of the photograph, just something that happened to be in the sky when the shutter opened. In isolation, any one of these photos means nothing. Together, they suggest multiple amateur astronomers independently captured the same unidentified object before anyone knew to look for it. Easter egg 30 ends this chapter, and it's one of the most structurally interesting. In the Haven's archives, there are official records kept by the Haven's administration. Most of these records are mundane: supply inventories, population counts, maintenance logs. But there's a category of record that repeats across multiple Haven archive locations, filed under a classification heading that loosely translates to prior intelligence. The contents of these files are redacted, but the metadata isn't. The dates, the filing officials' designations, and the file size estimations are all visible. The prior intelligence files are large. They predate the Ark's arrival by a significant margin, and they were filed by officials whose designations don't appear anywhere else in the Haven's administrative record. Someone was feeding information into the Haven system before the Havens were officially established, and whoever they were, they apparently didn't stay. Chapter 3. The Havens and What They Hide. Easter egg 31 is the first detail that starts to tell you the Havens aren't exactly what they present themselves to be. In the common areas of Haven spaces, there are murals. These are painted tributes to the community's survival, to the people who built the Haven, to the concept of human resilience. They're exactly what you'd expect. But the murals in the oldest sections of the Haven, the ones painted during the earliest period of occupation, are subtly different from the ones painted later. The older murals have more people in them, more figures in the background, working, contributing, being present. The newer murals have fewer. This isn't a stylistic choice. The ratio of depicted figures to the Haven's documented population doesn't match the mural's proportions. The older murals might just be depicting more people than were actually there, or the newer murals might be depicting fewer than there actually were, for reasons the art direction was deliberately choosing not to address. Easter egg 32 is about the water supply. In the infrastructure sections of the Haven, the plumbing and water management systems are detailed environments that players generally speed through, but the water filtration system has a secondary filtration stage that doesn't appear in standard civil engineering diagrams for water treatment. The additional stage uses a material that is specifically effective at removing trace compounds associated with certain types of atmospheric contamination that you would only encounter after a major impact event or an energetic aerial event. This secondary stage was built into the original Haven design, not added later. Whoever designed the Haven's water system was designing for contamination that hadn't happened yet. Easter egg 33 is in the Haven's medical records. These are stored in physical binders in the infirmary, and if you go through them, the records are real enough to read. For the most part, they're exactly what you'd expect, standard health maintenance records for a closed population. But there's a recurring notation in certain records, a short alphanumeric code appearing in the corner of the page for roughly 1 in every 20 residents. This code appears nowhere in any of the Haven's official documentation that's accessible in the game. Players who have catalogued all the individuals with this code have noticed that they tend to be older, tend to hold positions with access to sensitive parts of the Haven, and tend to have medical histories that include a specific type of neurological assessment that isn't part of standard intake procedure. Whatever this code means, it was important enough to document and obscure enough to not explain. Easter egg 34 is about the children in the Haven. The Haven has records of its younger residents, and the education materials in the Haven's school area are visible and readable. What's interesting is the curriculum. The younger children are taught standard subjects with a strong emphasis on practical skills, which makes sense given the environment. But the older students, in what would be their late secondary years, are being taught a subject that the curriculum labels simply as external systems. The textbooks for this course are locked in a storage cabinet in the classroom. The course description posted on the wall is deliberately vague. But several of the older students appear in the Haven's work assignment records shortly after completing this course, and their assignments are all in the sectors of the Haven that handle surface communications and ARC unit tracking. External systems, in this context, means the ARC. They're teaching teenagers to understand ARC behaviour before those teenagers are adults. Easter egg 35 is one of the most spatially interesting. Every Haven has, in its deepest sections, a door, or a series of doors, that are sealed in a way that's clearly more than standard security. The architecture around these doors is different from the rest of the Haven. The walls are thicker, the corridor leading to them is unpainted, undecorated, purely functional in a way that the rest of the Haven isn't. These doors don't appear in the Haven's official floor plans, which are posted in the administrative area. The floor plans show a solid wall where these doors actually are. The Haven was designed with rooms it officially chose not to document. What's in them is never directly addressed, but the presence of heavy-gauge power conduits running to those walls and the specific ventilation design in those corridors suggests something is running in those rooms, something that draws significant power and generates heat. Easter egg. 36 involves the food supply records. The Haven's commissary keeps detailed logs of food production and distribution. These logs are accessible in the kitchen and storage areas. If you compare the production numbers with the distribution numbers over time, they match closely but not perfectly. There's a small but consistent surplus. Not huge, but regular. And this surplus isn't being recorded anywhere in the normal inventory management system. A regular, off-book surplus of food in a closed system with limited resources suggests someone is either diverting supplies on a very small scale, or the population consuming food is slightly smaller than the population the Haven officially claims to have. Both of those possibilities have different implications. The first is a minor corruption issue. The second is something else entirely. Easter egg 37 is about light. The Haven uses a managed light cycle to approximate day and night for the mental health of its residents, which is a standard practice in enclosed communities. But the timing of the Haven's light cycle doesn't match any practical rhythm. It's not synchronized to the surface's actual day-night cycle. It's not running on a standard 24-hour period. The light cycle in the Haven is slightly shorter than a standard day, by enough that, over the course of a year, the Haven's residents would experience roughly 15 extra cycles compared to the surface. One possible reading is that this is just an artifact of system calibration drift. Another possible reading is that someone deliberately designed the Haven's light cycle to make it harder for residents to maintain an accurate sense of time. A community that doesn't know how long they've been underground is a community that's harder to reason with about leaving. Easter egg 38 is in the recreation areas. The Haven has spaces dedicated to games, social gathering, and creative activity. These are populated with equipment and supplies for various hobbies and pastimes. The board games in these areas are mostly familiar types, adapted or improvised from available materials. But one of them, found in 3 different Haven recreation areas across the game, is a game that doesn't have an obvious real-world equivalent. It involves a board with concentric circles and a set of pieces that are asymmetric, one type being mobile and numerous, the other type being fixed and singular. The rules are written on a card inside the box. In this game, the numerous pieces try to make contact with the fixed piece, which wins. The fixed piece wins by surviving a set number of rounds. The game is called Descent. The parallels to the Ark situation are not subtle. The question is whether this game was designed after the Ark arrived or before. Easter egg 39 is about the radio room. Every Haven has a communication section, and the radio equipment in these sections is operational enough to have current logs. The logs show the frequencies being monitored and the traffic received. Most of it is surface scanning and inter-Haven coordination, but on one frequency, which appears in the monitoring logs as inactive, there are periodic signal events logged. The log notes these as noise, but the timing of these noise events is regular. Not random atmospheric noise, regular, precisely timed, and the frequency they appear on falls within the range identified in Easter egg 14 as potentially significant for long-distance communication with orbital systems. The Haven's radio operators are logging a precisely timed signal on an orbital communication frequency as noise. Either they genuinely don't recognize it, or they've decided administratively that it's noise. Easter egg 40 is one that became more significant after a patch added additional texture detail to Haven wall surfaces. In the older, less maintained sections of the haven, the paint on the walls has cracked and peeled in the way that paint does over years of temperature fluctuation. Underneath the current paint layer, in certain sections, there are fragments of an older paint scheme. The colour is different, and in a few places, the older layer has enough intact surface area to show remnants of what was painted on it before the current design. What you can make out suggests a different designation for this section of the haven, a different set of room functions. The room that is currently a common residential bunk area was at some point labelled as something that involved the word containment. The haven was repurposed. What it was before it became a home is something the current residents may not know. Easter egg 41 is about the older haven residents. The population of the haven includes people who were adults when the Ark arrived, and who have therefore been underground for a significant portion of their lives. Some of these older residents have memory wall spaces in the communal areas, personal displays of their pre-Ark life. Most of these are photographs, small objects, personal mementos, but several of the older residents have walls that include professional materials, certificates, organisational IDs, work documentation. The professions represented on these walls tend toward the expected: civil engineers, doctors, educators. But there's a consistent presence of a particular professional specialisation that appears across multiple older residents from multiple havens. Several of them have documentation linking them to careers in what was called predictive systems modelling. This is a discipline that involves building models of how complex systems evolve over time. People whose entire professional purpose was anticipating future states ended up in the haven. Whether they chose to come here or were chosen is unclear. Easter egg 42 is in the seed vault. At the lower levels of the haven, beyond the standard agricultural grow rooms, there's a sealed cold storage area that functions as a seed bank. This is a practical and expected feature of a long-term survival installation. But the catalogue of seeds stored here goes beyond what you'd need for the haven's population. The quantity and variety of the seed stock is far in excess of what any agricultural programme for this population would require. It suggests that whoever planned the seed vault was planning for a scale of eventual agricultural activity that's much larger than the haven could currently support. They were planning for after. For a population larger than this haven has ever had. The scale of the seed vault implies a confidence that wasn't expressed anywhere else in the haven's visible planning. They expected to come out. They expected to come out with a lot of people. Easter egg 43 is one of the trickier ones to pin down because it appears differently in different haven locations, but the underlying pattern is the same. In the briefing rooms where surface missions are planned and discussed, the maps on the walls include detailed coverage of the zones accessible to players. But the edges of these maps, where the playable area ends, are handled differently in official haven maps versus the improvised field maps that raiders carry. The official maps have clean edges. The field maps, which are personal property and less controlled, sometimes extend past those clean edges into areas that are sketched in, roughed out, clearly based on personal observation rather than official cartography. What's sketched in the edges of the field maps suggests the playable zones are not the full extent of what's out there. There are sections that the haven officially doesn't map that individual raiders have personally visited. The omission appears deliberate. Easter egg 44 is about the anniversary celebrations. The haven marks the anniversary of its founding each year, and the communal areas have decorations and historical documentation around these events. If you read through the historical notes from each anniversary, the early years are documented in detail, people are named, events are described. As the years progress, the documentation becomes more selective. Certain anniversaries have very thin records. No explanation is given for why some years are documented richly and others are barely acknowledged. One possible reading is that certain years contained events that the haven's administration chose not to memorialise. The gap in the celebration record correlates loosely with the periods when the prior intelligence files from Easter egg 30 were most active. Something happened in those years. The Haven decided not to put it in the official memory. Easter egg 45 closes this chapter with a detail that's easy to miss because it involves listening rather than looking. In the Haven's dormitory sections, late in the in-game cycle, when most NPC residents are in their sleeping areas, there's an ambient audio layer that's distinct from the usual Haven ambience. Underneath the normal sound of ventilation and distant machinery, there's a human sound. A voice. Very low. Not speaking, not quite singing. It's more like a repetitive phrase being said quietly by someone half awake. If you record this audio and process it to isolate the voice from the ambient bed, the phrase is in a language that's clearly not the game's primary dialogue language. It's something older, and the words, run through translation tools by players who've identified the language, mean something close to, the door will be where the door was. Every night in the Haven, someone is quietly saying this, and no NPC is ever identified as the source. Chapter 4. What the Machines Remember. Easter egg 46 is about the ARC unit's patrol patterns. Players who've spent time mapping the surface zones have noticed that ARC unit patrols are not random, and they're not simply grid-based. They follow paths that, when plotted on a full map, trace the outlines of features that no longer exist, roads that have been buried under years of debris and overgrowth, the boundary of a building that's now completely collapsed, the perimeter of a facility that has been reduced to a foundation. The ARC units are patrolling spaces as they existed before the collapse, not as they exist now. This suggests one of two things. Either they were programmed before the collapse and their routes were never updated, or they have access to a memory of the world as it was that informs their current behaviour. Neither explanation is fully comfortable. Easter egg 47 is in the visual design of the ARC units themselves. Each class of ARC unit has a distinct morphology, and players have catalogued the design differences in detail. What hasn't been as widely discussed is the symmetry of the designs. Most machine designs, real and fictional, favour symmetry because symmetry simplifies manufacturing. The ARC units are symmetrical in their overall form, but asymmetrical in their surface detail. The texture of their casings, the placement of certain smaller components, the arrangement of certain external features, all of this is slightly offset. If you take the right side of a unit and mirror it to compare to the left side, they don't match. The asymmetry is consistent across units of the same type and consistent across units found in different zones. This wasn't a manufacturing variance, it was designed in. Something about the ARC's design philosophy includes intentional asymmetry. The reason for this is never explained, but it suggests function rather than aesthetics. Easter egg 48 is about damaged ARC units. When ARC units are destroyed, they leave wreckage that persists in the environment for a period before it's processed and cleared. If you examine the internal components visible in destroyed units, there are structures that don't correspond to any functional system in the unit's apparent operating capacity. There are chambers that appear to serve no mechanical or electronic purpose. They're sealed. They're not damaged, even in heavily destroyed units. They appear to be protected by the unit's structural design in a way that other, clearly vital components aren't. These sealed chambers are present in every unit type at a consistent location in their chassis. Something in there is being specifically preserved, even in death. Players have speculated about what might be in these chambers, but no playthrough or data mining effort has revealed the contents conclusively. Easter egg 49 is one of the game's most unsettling audio details, and it requires very specific conditions. If you're in a surface zone at a time when no ARC units are actively alert and in combat, and you stand still for long enough, some units will begin to emit a very quiet sound that isn't their standard operational audio. It's not a communication signal. It's not a mechanical sound. It has a quality that's described differently by different players. Some call it rhythmic, some call it searching. What it most closely resembles when isolated from the ambient environment and processed is something with the temporal structure of a question. A repeating phrase with a rising cadence at the end. The units make this sound when they think nothing is listening, or when they're doing something that they do only when they're not engaged with a threat. Whatever that activity is, it involves making sounds that follow the pattern of inquiry. Easter egg 50 is about how arc units interact with each other. When two arc units of the same class are in close proximity in a non-combat state, they occasionally orient toward each other and remain still for a brief period. Players have logged these interactions and noticed that the duration of these stillness periods varies. Short stillness periods, a few seconds, are common, but occasionally units enter extended stillness periods of a minute or more. During these extended periods, other nearby units will also stop and orient toward the pair. When the stillness ends, the units resume normal patrol behavior. No in-game documentation addresses this behavior. One possible reading is that these stillness periods are communication events. Another reading points towards something more like the way certain animals perform status displays, establishing hierarchy or sharing information. The arc units in these moments are doing something together that doesn't have an operational explanation. Easter egg 51 is in the materials the arc units collect. On the surface, players scavenge resources. Arc units also collect things. You can observe this if you follow a unit without engaging it. They pick up specific material types from the environment, carry them for a period, and then deposit them at locations that aren't arc nests or processing stations. These deposit locations are unmarked. They don't appear to serve any structural function. The materials deposited there are varied but not random. There's a consistent compositional logic to what each unit type collects, and the deposit locations, when mapped across a full zone, form a pattern, not a random scatter, a deliberate arrangement. Whatever the arc units are building or marking with these material deposits, it's a slow process, and it's been going on for a long time. The deposits are layered. There are old ones underneath recent ones. Easter egg 52 is about how arc units respond to music. There are a few locations on the surface where old audio equipment is still partially functional, running on residual power or on small battery units that haven't depleted. In two of these locations, the audio equipment is playing music, old recorded music from before the collapse. When arc units enter these locations, their behavior is observably different. They move more slowly. They spend more time in the space. They do not engage with the audio equipment itself. They just exist in the space with the music longer than they spend in equivalent spaces without it. This doesn't point toward any specific law conclusion, but it's a detail that the game builds into arc behavior that suggests their relationship with human-made sound is something other than pure indifference. Easter egg 53 involves the larger arc structures found on the surface. These fixed installations, whatever their primary function, have an architectural language of their own. If you study the geometry of the structures, the angles and proportions that appear across different arc installations in different zones, they're consistent. They form a coherent aesthetic. But that aesthetic has a point of reference. Certain proportional relationships in arc architecture correspond to ratios that appear in specific human mathematical traditions, not the most common ones, not things like the golden ratio, more obscure relationships that were worked out by a very specific school of mathematical philosophy in the early 20th century. The question of whether this is a coincidence built into the art direction or a deliberate suggestion that arc architecture was influenced by or built around human mathematical knowledge is one the game doesn't answer. Easter egg 54 is about what arc units don't do. In the surface zones, there are areas where players can observe arc units from concealment and simply watch. The units patrol, they interact, they collect, they communicate. What they don't do is rest. There are no inactive periods, no low power states visible in normal patrol behavior. They operate continuously. But there are locations, very specific ones, where ARC units do enter what appears to be a different operational mode. These are always locations with very specific geological features, areas with high concentrations of the mineral discussed in Easter egg 28. In these locations, some units will stop moving entirely and enter a static posture. They remain this way for extended periods. They don't respond to stimuli that would normally trigger an alert. One possible reading is that these locations aren't rest stops. They're more like charging stations, but for something that isn't power, something that comes from the ground. Easter egg 55 is in the scale and diversity of ARC unit types. Players have catalogued over a dozen distinct ARC unit types, with clearly different functions: combat units, structural units, smaller reconnaissance units, larger units that don't seem to be primarily combat-focused. The breadth of this functional diversity suggests that the ARC, as a system, has a complex internal economy. It's not an army, it's a civilization of machines, each type serving a role in a larger operation. The question of what that operation is, what the overall goal of the ARC presence on Earth represents, is the central mystery of the game. But the unit diversity alone points towards something more organized and more purposeful than a simple occupation or a simple search and destroy mission. Easter egg 56 is about how ARC units treat human structures. They don't destroy everything. This is more notable than it might seem. In zones where ARC units have been present for a long time, and the damage they've caused is extensive, there are consistently certain types of buildings left intact. Medical facilities are rarely destroyed by ARC units. Research buildings, particularly anything connected to scientific research rather than commercial or civic use, are similarly left standing more often than other structure types. Libraries and data storage facilities are often in better condition than their surroundings would suggest if purely random damage patterns applied. One possible reading is that the ARC are preserving certain human knowledge repositories. Why they would preserve human knowledge is a question that opens up implications that the game is very careful not to close. Easter egg 57 is one that specifically caught the attention of players with linguistics backgrounds. The ARC units, when they emit their communication signals, produce signal patterns that have been recorded and analysed by players using audio tools. These patterns, when visualized as waveforms or spectrograms, have a structural property that linguists identify as duality of patterning. This is considered a defining feature of language, the property of having both meaningless units that combine to form meaningful ones. Human languages have this, so do certain animal communication systems. The ARC signal patterns, at least in their recorded form, also appear to have it. This doesn't mean the ARC use language in the way humans do, but it points towards something that's not just a carrier wave or a mechanical coordination signal. It points towards something expressive. Easter egg 58 is about the ARC units that are found dormant in certain underground locations. These units are not destroyed. They're not damaged in obvious ways. They're just still. Players who've encountered these dormant units in underground tunnels and in sub-basement levels of ruined buildings have noted that they're always positioned facing the same direction. Not toward an exit, not toward any obvious structural feature. They're oriented towards specific compass bearings that, when triangulated across multiple dormant unit locations in different zones, all point toward the same general direction. A direction that corresponds to a region of the map that's currently off limits to players. The dormant units aren't waiting for a threat. They're waiting for something, and they know which direction to wait toward. Easter egg 59 is about the oldest ARC units. Based on surface oxidation patterns, weathering of external casings, and the depth of their tracks in sediment, some ARC units have been on the surface significantly longer than others. These older units have visual differences, more accumulated environmental material on their surfaces, a slight difference in how their movement systems operate, suggesting mechanical wear. But they also behave differently. They are avoided specifically by other ARC units. Newer units will alter their patrol routes to not bring them into close proximity with the older ones. When they do pass near an older unit, they exhibit the stillness behaviour from Easter egg 50, but very briefly and with what could be interpreted as avoidance. The older units are treated with something that functions like deference or wariness by younger units. Age in the ARC means something. Easter egg 60 closes this chapter with an observation that's hard to articulate without sounding more philosophical than I want to be. So I'll keep it simple. ARC units, when they have destroyed a threat, an enemy, or a structural obstacle, sometimes pause over what they've destroyed. Briefly. Long enough to be registered, but short enough that players often miss it. This pause happens with defeated enemies, with demolished structures, and with the burned sections of the ground left by their directed energy weapons. It doesn't happen with everything they do, just with destruction specifically. The pause is consistent across unit types. Something in the ARC's operational programming includes a moment after destruction that serves no tactical purpose. Whatever that moment is for, it was designed in. It was intentional. And what an autonomous machine system is doing with a moment of stillness after it destroys something is a question this game plants and leaves open. Chapter 5: Faction Secrets and Hidden Allegiances. Easter egg 61 is about the Haven's leadership structure. In the Haven's administrative area, there are organisational charts posted on the boards and printed in official documents. These charts show a clear hierarchy with defined roles and responsibilities. But if you compare the organisational chart on the public-facing board in the common area with the one in the restricted administrative office, they're different. Not dramatically different. The overall structure is the same, but there are roles on the restricted chart that don't appear on the public one. These roles have designations that use a different naming convention from the standard Haven administrative hierarchy. They're listed at positions that don't fit neatly into the standard chain of command. They're neither at the top nor embedded in the standard operational flow. They're listed to the side, connected by lines that suggest adjacency rather than hierarchy. Whatever these roles are, the Haven's leadership knows about them, and the Haven's residents don't. Easter egg 62 is in the Raider's personal gear. Players who examine the personal items carried by NPC raiders, visible in lockers, and personal storage spaces in the raid staging areas, find a range of idiosyncratic items that reflect individual personalities. Most of these are personal mementos or practical tools. But several raiders have items that suggest organisational affiliation beyond their current assignment. Specific badge types, specific insignia on personal equipment. The insignia seen on the organisational uniforms from Easter egg 23 appear on the personal gear of a subset of the raider population. These individuals are not clustered together. They're distributed across different raider groups. They work alongside people who don't carry this insignia. They're not separately organised within the Haven's Raider program. They're embedded in it. Easter egg 63 is about the Haven's relationship with other Havens. Inter-Haven communication is referenced in the radio logs and in administrative correspondence. The official tone of this communication is collaborative and measured. But in the personal correspondence found in the Haven, letters and notes between individual residents who have contacts in other Havens, the tone is different. There's a level of concern about the other Havens that doesn't appear in official communications. Specific worries about decision-making, references to choices made by other Haven administrations that the letter writers find troubling. And in at least 3 separate pieces of personal correspondence, a reference to a situation described as the Meridian issue. Meridian is a name that doesn't appear in any official Haven documentation available in the game, but it appears repeatedly in private correspondence, always in a context suggesting it's something everyone involved already knows about, and nobody wants to explain explicitly. Easter egg 64 is about a specific NPC who appears in one of the raid staging areas. This character has a backstory that's assembled from several environmental details rather than from dialogue. Their personal locker has items that suggest a professional history in telecommunications engineering. Their notebook, readable on their desk, contains technical notes that are written in a way that suggests they were working on something in the Haven's communications systems. And the relevant detail, there's a page in this notebook that's been torn out. Not cleanly, torn roughly, like it was removed quickly. The remaining fragment at the edge of the torn page has a few words visible: signal confirmation, and the numbers that correspond to the frequency from Easter egg 39, the one the Haven logs as noise. Someone in the Haven confirmed that signal, and then removed the confirmation from their notes. Easter egg 65 is about the teaching staff in the Haven's education section. The educators in the Haven are credited in the curriculum materials posted around the school areas. Most of them are credentialed in expected fields. One educator is credited as the designer of the external systems curriculum from Easter egg 34. Their credentials list a pre-ARC affiliation with an organisation called the Institute for Adaptive Systems Research. No such organisation appears in any pre-ARC historical record accessible in the game, but the acronym it forms is notable: IASR, and an older piece of documentation in the Haven's archives, a pre-ARC document that was retained when the Haven was established, uses this acronym in a way that suggests it was already known to the Haven's founders. This person and their organisation were already part of the Haven's world before the Haven was built. Easter egg 66 is in the medical section. There's a specific supply chain document in the infirmary that lists the origin points of various medical supplies. Most supplies come from surface salvage, with their origin zones noted. But several medical items, specifically the ones used in the neurological assessments flagged in Easter egg 33, list their origin as Haven Central Distribution. Haven Central Distribution is referenced in several supply chain documents. It's clearly a real administrative function, but it doesn't have a physical location anywhere in the Haven maps. It's a distribution point that exists in the paperwork, but not in the physical space. Something is being supplied from a location that the Haven's own maps don't show. Easter egg 67 is about the ARC raiders who don't come back. Surface missions have a casualty rate, and the Haven tracks this. The casualty records are in the administrative area, and they're maintained in detail, but the records have a category that distinguishes between killed in action and missing. The missing category, which is notably not small, has a subcategorization that players have noticed. Most missing persons are listed as lost, contact lost, but a small number are listed simply as status unknown, with no additional notation. This is a different classification. Lost implies a specific event after which contact was lost. Status unknown implies something else entirely. As if the Haven simply doesn't know what happened to these individuals, not because they're dead, but because they went somewhere or became something that the Haven's categories can't describe. Easter egg 68 is about the decommissioned equipment sections of the Haven. There are storage areas where older, no longer operational equipment is kept rather than scrapped, apparently for parts. In these storage areas, there's a set of early generation Raider equipment. It's clearly older than the current standard issue. It's a different design philosophy, more improvised, more varied, but it has been modified in ways that suggest it was originally designed for a different primary purpose and adapted for surface raiding over time. The original design of this older equipment is more consistent with exploration gear than combat gear. The Haven's Raider program didn't start as a fighting force. It started as a scouting operation. Something that happened on the surface changed the emphasis from understanding to surviving. Easter egg 69 is one of the more politically charged details in the game's lore, and the one I find most interesting to think about. In the Haven's records, there are documented instances of disagreement between administrators. These are recorded in meeting minutes and informal correspondence. Most of the disagreements are about resource allocation and operational priorities, normal governance stuff. But there's a specific thread of disagreement that appears across multiple documents and multiple time periods. It's about contact. A group within the Haven's leadership consistently argues for attempting communication with the Ark. A different group consistently argues that this is dangerous and unnecessary. The communication faction never wins in any of the documented debates. Their proposals are recorded, voted on, and rejected. But they keep proposing, and the language they use in their proposals suggests they have a specific reason to believe communication is possible. A reason they never state fully in the official record. Easter Egg 70 is about the personal quarters of a senior Haven administrator whose room is accessible in one zone. This room has more personal detail than most. Books, photographs, small objects, standard. But the books are interesting. The collection isn't random, it's highly specific. History of long-distance communication, theoretical linguistics, cognitive architecture in non-biological systems, signal theory. This is a library assembled with intent, not accumulated over a life of general reading. This administrator built a very specific intellectual toolkit, and the framing of that toolkit, the combination of communication, linguistics, cognition, and signal theory, reads like a reading list for someone trying to understand how to talk to a mind that's built differently from a human one. The administrator is or was trying to learn how to communicate with the Ark. Easter Egg 71 is about the older faction that predates the Haven. In the deeper archive sections, there are documents from a period before the Haven was formally established, when the people who would eventually build it were still above ground, surviving the initial Ark arrival. These documents record decisions made by a group that called itself simply the Remnant. The Remnant's decisions in that early period are practical and desperate in tone. But one decision, recorded in a document that is partially damaged and difficult to read, appears to involve a deliberate choice about what information to include in the founding records of the Haven and what to exclude. The Remnant decided as a founding act to edit the history they carried into the underground. What they edited out isn't fully recoverable from the damaged document, but the fact that they edited at all is clearly recorded in the document that survived the edit. Easter Egg 72 is in the art of the Haven. Beyond the official murals, individual residents have created personal art that appears in communal spaces and personal areas. Some of this art is representational: landscapes of the surface, portraits of people, still lifes. A subset of this art is abstract, and within the abstract work, several pieces by different artists share a visual motif that none of the artists appear to have explicitly discussed with each other. The motif is a spiral, specifically a spiral that begins from a central point and expands outward but terminates before it closes, an open spiral. The same form appears in the work of at least 6 different artists across multiple locations. If there were a shared artistic influence, a teacher, or a common source, it might explain the motif, but the artists who create this motif don't appear to have professional connections to each other. They arrived at the same form independently. Easter Egg 73 is about the surface teams that specialize in Ark research rather than supply acquisition. There are references in the Haven's records to specialist teams whose mission profile involves Ark study rather than resource extraction. These teams are listed in the mission records, but their reports, unlike the supply acquisition reports, are not filed in the general archive. Their reports go directly to a separate classification. The supply acquisition reports are dense with practical detail. The research team mission records are a single line of text: mission completed, materials transferred. What the research teams bring back is never described in any accessible document, only that it's transferred and that the transfer is to a location that, again, doesn't appear on any physical map of the haven. Easter egg 74 is about the gate. Every haven has a primary access point to the surface, a heavily secured gate system through which raiders depart and return. These gate systems are elaborate and their security procedures are detailed in the operational documentation around the gate area. But in every haven, there's a secondary access point. These secondary access points are in different locations in different havens, and they're not advertised. They're secured differently from the main gates, and the documentation around them is absent rather than present. The absence of documentation for these secondary access points is more notable than the access points themselves. The main gates are documented exhaustively because documentation serves operational safety. The secondary gates have no documentation. They're being used by people who don't want their use recorded. Easter egg 75 closes this chapter with the detail I think about most in this section of the game's lore. There's an individual in one haven who is consistently present in the briefing area, not as a participant in briefings, but as an observer. They never speak in any accessible audio or dialogue. They're present in the background. Players who have noticed this character and tracked their position through multiple sessions have noted that they're always present when research team missions are being discussed, and they're always absent when standard supply missions are being briefed. This character has no official designation in the Haven's organizational chart. They're not in the raider registry. They're not in the medical records. They're not in the administrative roster. They exist in the Haven in a completely undocumented way. Someone is in the Haven who the Haven doesn't officially know about, and they seem to have a particular interest in what the research teams are finding. Chapter 6. The Language of the Surface. Easter egg 76 is about graffiti. The surface world is full of human-made markings left behind by survivors, scavengers, and earlier waves of raiders. Most of this graffiti is what you'd expect: personal expressions, warnings, territorial markings, notes for other survivors. But layered within it, across multiple zones and multiple surfaces, is a consistent subset of markings that use a specific visual grammar. They combine simple geometric shapes in a way that isn't random and isn't identical to any known pre-arc marking system. They were developed after the collapse by someone or some group who needed a communication system that was legible to those who knew it and opaque to everyone else. Players who have catalogued these markings and attempted to decode them have found that they can be grouped into roughly 4 categories of meaning: direction, warning, presence, and time. It's a navigation and communication language. Someone built it for the surface. Easter egg 77 is about the way the surface world has been named by its survivors. In the field maps carried by NPC raiders and in the informal documentation found in surface shelter points, locations have been given names. These names aren't the official designations from before the collapse. They're new names, assigned by the people currently living with these places. Some are practical descriptions, some are references to events that happened there, and some are stranger. A location near a collapsed overpass is called the listening post by the people who use it, and nothing in any accessible documentation explains what about it earns that name. A building that serves as a temporary shelter is named after, which is a complete sentence of a name and equally unexplained. The informal nomenclature of the surface is a record of experience that was never written down, officially, but persists in the names. Easter egg 78 is about the survival manuals. In surface shelter points and in Haven educational materials, there are survival guides that were produced in the early post-arc period. These guides are practical and clearly written from experience, but the writing style across multiple independently produced guides is remarkably consistent. Not in their content, which varies by region and by the specific challenges being addressed. In their structure, the way information is organized, the way warnings are formatted, the way critical steps are indicated with specific visual cues. This structural consistency across guides that were produced independently suggests they were all influenced by a common template. Someone produced a meta-guide for how to write survival guides and distributed it before or during the early collapse period. The existence of that meta-guide is interesting. Its absence from the current accessible archive is more interesting. Easter egg 79 is about place names again, but this time it's about what hasn't been renamed. Certain locations on the surface retain their pre-arc names, even among survivors who have no obvious reason to know those names. They weren't from those locations. They have no pre-arc connection to them. But they use the original names. This selective preservation of certain place names alongside the renaming of others suggests that some locations have significance that survivors recognize independent of their personal history with those places. The locations that retain their original names are, with notable consistency, the same locations that ARC units treat differently in their patrol patterns. The ones that the birds avoid, the ones near the unusual mineral deposits, the surface's human memory and the ARC's behaviour pattern converge on the same locations. Easter egg 80 is in the personal journals found in surface shelters. There are several readable journals in the game, left by survivors who use specific locations as long-term shelters before eventually moving on or not moving on. These journals are some of the most human documents in the game's lore. They track the psychological arc of someone living under these conditions, the shifts in perception, the coping mechanisms, the way hope and despair alternate. But several of these journals, from different authors in different zones, contain entries that describe the same experience, an experience of sound, a sound heard in the middle of the night, described as coming from below the ground rather than from the arc activity above, a low rhythmic sound that the writers consistently describe as feeling like a response, like whatever's below is answering something. No two journal writers are in close enough geographic proximity for them to be describing the same physical location. Whatever they heard it in different places. Easter egg 81 is about the markings on the undersides of surfaces. ARC units operate at ground level and slightly above. Human survivors operate at ground level and slightly above. Neither group, typically, looks at the undersides of things. Tables, vehicles, structural overhangs. These surfaces, rarely observed, are where a subset of the surface's markings ends up. On the undersides of several flat surfaces across different zones, there are markings that are neither the survivor graffiti language from Easter egg 76 nor standard industrial markings. They're something else. They're small, precise, consistent in their symbol set, and placed in positions that require someone to have been down on the ground, underneath these surfaces, placing them deliberately. Whatever these markings are and whoever placed them, they were going to lengths to put them somewhere that a casual observer would never see. Easter egg 82 is about the way the ARC units have changed the surface landscape through their presence, specifically through what they haven't destroyed. There are clear-cut paths through the debris and overgrowth that cover most of the surface. These paths were not made by human movement. The scale is wrong and the precision is wrong for human foot traffic. They were made by something much larger and more consistent in its movement. But they don't lead to ARC installations or patrol routes. They lead to places that appear unremarkable. Open ground, unoccupied areas with no structural features of note. The paths were made deliberately by ARC units moving with purpose, and they lead nowhere that makes obvious sense. Whatever is at the destination of these paths isn't visible above the surface. The interest point, whatever it is below it. Easter egg 83 is about photography again, but this time it's about cameras still found on the surface, in working or near working condition. In one zone, there's a photography studio whose equipment room still has film cameras in protected cases. The cases protected them well enough that some of the film is still usable, in theory. This isn't what's interesting. What's interesting is that one of these cameras still has film in it, film that was never developed, in a surface zone where there's no way to develop it in standard ways. It's just a camera with exposed but unprocessed film. The camera's frame counter shows 12 frames were shot. The camera's timestamp, visible in the display window, shows those 12 frames were shot after the collapse. Not before, after. Someone was still using film photography on the surface in the post-arc world, and they never developed what they captured. Easter egg 84 is about the sound design in different weather conditions. In surface zones during rain events, the ambient audio changes significantly. The rain itself is standard weather audio. But underneath the rain audio, there are additional sound elements that don't appear in dry weather. They're filtered by the rain, partially masked by it. Players who have specifically isolated the rain audio event and filtered it out of their recordings have found that the underlying sound in those conditions includes a very low-frequency hum that isn't present in any dry weather recordings from the same locations. This hum has a cyclic quality. It changes slowly over the duration of a rain event, reaching a peak somewhere in the middle and declining toward the end. If the rain masks it and the rain sound removal reveals it, it's a sound that the game is deliberately hiding. Something about rain makes this sound active or audible, and something in the game's design ensures you can only hear it if you specifically go looking. Easter egg 85 is about the medical waste found on the surface. In hospital and clinic ruins, medical waste containers are still in place in areas where the waste management infrastructure failed long before the containers were moved. In the waste containers for pharmaceutical materials, the remains of medication packaging are readable. Most of what's in these containers is expected, but there's a medication that appears in waste containers across multiple medical facilities in different zones with a frequency that's disproportionate to its apparent purpose. It's a medication whose real-world analogue is used in treatments related to memory formation and stress response. It's the kind of medication that would be used in populations experiencing extreme ongoing stress, but the quantities implied by the waste materials suggest it was being administered at a scale consistent with preventive treatment of a whole population, not therapeutic treatment of affected individuals. Someone was medicating a large group of people in advance to manage their memory formation under stress. Easter egg 86 is about the water towers. The surface zones include several large water storage towers from the pre-arc period. These towers are rusted and in various states of structural compromise. What's interesting is what's inside a specific water tower in the industrial zone. It's been emptied of water for a long time, obviously, but the interior has been used consistently. There are marks on the interior wall at regular intervals, like measurements being tracked, and there's a small platform, clearly improvised, attached to the interior about halfway up, accessible by a makeshift ladder. From this platform, through a hole in the tower's wall, you have a specific sightline to a section of the sky. The platform was built to observe something specific in that portion of the sky. The marks on the interior wall, regular and numerous, track the observations of someone who came here repeatedly over a long period and measured what they saw. Easter egg 87 is about the dust. In enclosed surface spaces, particularly in sealed or semi-sealed structures, the dust has settled in ways that record the movements of things through those spaces. Most of the disturbance patterns in settled dust are from player movement and from NPC movement, but in certain spaces that players don't regularly traverse, the dust patterns show evidence of movement that predates any current occupation, patterns that go from point to point in ways that suggest purpose. In one specific building, a pre-arc research facility, the dust patterns on the floor of the main lab suggest something moved through that space and specifically stopped at 4 points in the room. The 4 points form a precise geometric relationship to each other, a square but rotated at a very specific angle relative to the room's orientation. The room was visited. The visitor stopped at 4 deliberate positions, and then apparently left, and nothing disturbed the dust patterns since. Easter egg 88 is about the trees. Not all the vegetation on the surface is dying or dead. In certain zones, trees are growing in ways that suggest they're thriving despite everything. And a few of these thriving trees are remarkable because of where they're growing. They're growing in positions that, if you look at them from above in the zone map, form deliberate arrangements, not random placement. The trees in these thriving clusters are arranged in patterns that mirror certain symbols found in the Ark's own visual communication system, the one referenced in earlier Easter eggs. Either the trees grew into those positions naturally, which would be an extraordinary coincidence, or they were planted there by something that wanted to mark these locations using a symbol system that wouldn't be immediately recognizable as artificial. Something planted trees in Ark symbols. The trees are still growing. Easter egg 89 is about the smell. Sound design and visual design in Ark Raiders have been widely discussed. Audio references to smell are less common in game design overall. But in the text notes and personal journals found on the surface, smell is described repeatedly and specifically. Multiple writers describe a smell associated with Ark unit presence. It's described differently by different writers, which is consistent with how smell is subjectively experienced. But the descriptions share a common quality. They all describe something that they've never smelled before, something with no pre-Ark reference point. And one writer, in a passage that's easy to miss because it's at the back of a notebook that's found in a hard-to-reach location, describes the smell as almost familiar, like something I knew but from much further away. That description, almost familiar but from far away, is one of the stranger things written by a survivor on the surface. Easter egg 90 closes this chapter with an observation about silence. In the surface zones, Ark units produce sound. Their movement, their systems, their communications. But there are zones within the surface where the Ark unit audio is noticeably absent. These quiet zones are not areas where Ark units aren't present. Ark units are in these zones. They're just not making noise while they're there. Their mechanical and communication audio drops to below ambient level. Only their movement remains audible. Something in these specific areas causes Ark units to operate silently. Players who have mapped the quiet zones against other environmental data have found a correlation. The quiet zones correspond almost exactly to the locations where the journals describe the underground sounds from Easter egg 80. In the places where humans heard something answering from below, the Ark stops making noise above. Whatever conversation that is, it's happening at both ends. Chapter 7. Lost Soldiers and Forgotten Names. Easter egg 91 is about the military presence on the surface. In the early post-Ark period, before the havens were fully established, there was clearly some kind of organised military response to the Ark. The evidence of this is spread across the surface in the form of military equipment, fortified positions, and documentation. What's notable is how this military presence ended. The fortified positions weren't abandoned in haste. They were methodically dismantled. Equipment was moved, not left. Documentation was either removed or, in some cases, destroyed in place. Somebody organised a deliberate withdrawal from the surface, and they were thorough about it. What they left behind was left accidentally, and what survived has a quality of being overlooked rather than preserved. Easter egg 92 is in a specific piece of military documentation that survived the withdrawal. It's a partial roster, found in a secure container in one of the fortified positions that was missed during the cleanup. The roster lists personnel by designation rather than name, which is standard for certain types of operations. Most designations are followed by status codes. Most of the status codes translate to standard military outcomes, but a subset of the designations on this roster are followed by a status code that doesn't correspond to any known military status convention. Players who've identified this code and attempted to decode it through reference to other available documentation have not found a standard definition for it. The closest analogue in standard procedure would be something like transferred to external assignment, which, for people who were presumably part of a surface military operation during the Ark invasion, is an unusual status. Easter egg 93 is about the personal effects of soldiers. In the ruins of military positions, personal items belonging to individual soldiers were left behind when the positions were abandoned. Photographs, letters, small personal objects. The letters are readable, and they are unsurprisingly a mix of homesickness, duty, and fear. What's interesting is the letters that don't fit this pattern. Several letters, in positions that were clearly held by officers rather than enlisted personnel, have a different tone. They're almost clinical. They report observations rather than express feelings. They note specific details about ARC unit behaviour, about environmental anomalies, about events that the writers clearly want recorded somewhere. These are unofficial observation logs written in the form of letters home. The writers knew they couldn't file a formal report for some reason, and they chose letters as the only recording medium available to them. Some of them are addressed to no one. Easter egg 94 involves the medics. In any military operation, medical personnel have distinct equipment and documentation. In the abandoned surface positions, the medical supplies and records that were left behind have a specific distribution. The standard medical supplies, bandages, analgesics, standard trauma equipment are evenly distributed. But certain specialist medical supplies, the ones related to neurological treatment and to radiation exposure, are concentrated in specific positions, not evenly spread through the operation, present in much larger quantities in 2 or 3 specific locations. Whatever the military operation was doing that required those specialist supplies, it was concentrated. Specific people in specific locations needed treatment that the rest of the operation apparently didn't. Easter egg 95 is about unit patches. Military insignia found on equipment and clothing in the abandoned positions include standard organisational patches for the units that were operating there. But on a subset of the equipment, there are additional patches that are consistent with the insignia from Easter eggs 23 and 62. The same circle with line symbol on military equipment in a military operation. This connects the pre-collapse organisational uniforms from the commercial zone, the same insignia on Haven Raiders, and now the same symbol on a surface military operation. This symbol belongs to an organisation that existed before the Ark, operated during the military response to the Ark, and has members embedded in the Haven today. It's been continuous through the entire timeline, and it's never been officially named in any accessible document. Easter egg 96 is in the field surgery notes. In one of the specialist medical positions from Easter egg 94, there are detailed field surgery notes in the procedure log. These are clinical and professional. They describe standard trauma procedures in standard medical language. But 2 entries in this log describe procedures that are not standard. They describe what appears to be the removal of something from patients, described in the notes simply as foreign material. The foreign material is not described further, but the procedure notes indicate it was found in multiple patients. The material was removed and, according to the log, transferred to a specialist for analysis. The specialist is not named. The analysis results are not recorded. The foreign material found in multiple injured soldiers was interesting enough to be transferred to an unidentified specialist, and then the record stops. Easter egg 97 is about the radio communication logs from the military surface operations. Some of these logs survived in partially damaged form. The communication records show the frequency and content of transmissions during the period when surface operations were active. Most of the transmissions are tactical, coordinating movement and response to ARC activity. But the frequency structure of the communication shifts over time. In early transmissions, the Haven side communication is active and responsive. As the logs progress, The Haven side responses become less frequent. And near the end of the log period, there are transmissions from surface personnel that receive no response at all. The surface military was still transmitting to the Haven. The Haven had stopped answering. The withdrawal of the military from the surface and the Haven's communication silence coincide. The Haven didn't coordinate the withdrawal. The Haven cut contact. The military eventually came in on their own terms. Easter egg 98 is about a specific individual referenced in multiple separate documents. This person's name, or more precisely, their operational designation, appears in the partial roster from Easter egg 92, in one of the unofficial letters from Easter egg 93, in the specialist medical referral from Easter egg 96, and in a separate piece of Haven administrative correspondence that predates all of these by several years. 4 separate documents from different operational contexts reference the same designation. The letter describes this person in terms that suggest significant authority and unusual knowledge. The Haven correspondence treats them as a known entity with an existing relationship to the Haven's administration. Whoever this person is, they were known to the Haven before the surface operations, they were present during the surface operations, and their current status is not recorded in any accessible document. The trail ends, they're just gone from the record. Easter egg 99 is about the art left by soldiers. Some of the fortified positions have drawings and carvings made by personnel during periods of waiting. This is a common expression of boredom and stress in enclosed positions. Most of the art is recognizable in its subject matter: people, places, abstract patterns. But there's a recurring subject that appears across multiple positions in multiple zones, always made by different hands and different styles, something being pulled towards something larger, a small form and a large form. Gravity implied. The small form is sometimes rendered as a human figure. The large form is never rendered in detail, just a presence, massive, circular, drawing everything toward itself. The soldiers who made this art were trying to depict something they were thinking about, something pulling things toward it, something enormous and circular, something that sounds like it might be the source of the arc. Easter egg 100 is about the music. In one position, which appears to have been occupied for longer than the others, based on the amount of personal material left behind, there's a handwritten music sheet. Someone had been composing during their time there. The notation is for a single voice, no accompaniment. The lyrics written below the notation are in a simple rhyme scheme. They describe in plain language a night watch, watching the sky, waiting for something to come down. The emotional register of the lyrics shifts between verses, from alertness to resignation to something that might be hope or might be acceptance. The song is unfinished. The notation stops in the middle of the third verse. Whatever the writer was about to say next, they didn't finish writing it. The sheet is dated, and the date is very close to the dates in the communication log from Easter egg 97, when the Haven stopped answering. Easter egg 101 is about the maps left behind. Beyond the field maps from Easter egg 43, in the military positions there are tactical maps that were produced and used during surface operations. These maps are detailed and professionally made. They show ARC unit patrol zones, high-risk areas, known ARC installations, but they also show things that aren't on any Haven administrative map. Locations marked as active, locations marked as primary. These marks are placed on areas of the map that correspond to zones players can't currently access. The military mapped them. They knew what was there, and whatever is there was significant enough to be marked as primary. The military had been places that the current Haven Raider program hasn't been authorized to go. What they found there informed their understanding of the ARC in ways that aren't recorded in any accessible document. Easter egg 102 is about the dogs, again. In one of the military positions, there's evidence of a trained working dog having been stationed there. The position has a dog kennel area, food containers marked for an animal, And in the personal effects section of the position, a dog tag for an animal with a registered military designation. What makes this detail notable is the medical section of the position. In the field surgery notes adjacent to the notes from Easter egg 96, there's an entry that refers to the animal by its military designation. The animal was brought to the field surgery. The note is clinical in the way the others are, but the detail it includes about what was found in this animal is more specific than what's described for the human patients. The same foreign material from Easter egg 96 was found in the dog. The ark's effect on biological entities didn't distinguish between species. Easter egg 103 is about the last departure. In one position, the material evidence of departure is still present. The abandonment wasn't orderly in the way other positions were. This one was left in a condition that suggests the personnel left very quickly. Equipment wasn't moved. Personal items weren't taken. The only thing that was apparently taken was documentation, because the shelves and filing cases that would have held documents are empty. Everything else remains, including personal effects and operational equipment that soldiers would not typically leave voluntarily. They left because something happened, and whatever happened was fast enough that they only had time to grab the documents. Why the documents specifically in a rapid departure was the priority is something the position's current state doesn't answer. Easter egg 104 is about the view from the position in Easter egg 103. The position was built on elevated ground, which was clearly a tactical choice. From the observation points of this position, you can see a significant section of the surrounding zone, and with the right vantage, you can see a specific area in the middle distance that has an unusual visual quality. The arc units in that area behave differently. They don't patrol, they congregate. Slowly, over time, additional units arrive. They remain gathered in this area for extended periods. Players who've observed this area from the elevated position over multiple sessions have noted that the congregation events are periodic, not constant. The arc units gather at a specific frequency, regular enough to be a cycle. Whatever happens in that area, it happens on a schedule. The soldiers in that position had a perfect view of it. Easter egg 105 closes this chapter with a detail that's almost too small to be significant and might be nothing at all. In the military debris of several positions, there are standard issue identity documents. These were left behind in the abandonment and are readable. The documents are formatted identically, as you'd expect from standardized military ID: name, designation, unit, date of issue. Most of these are unremarkable, but several of the documents have a handwritten addition on the back. It's the same handwriting on all of them, which means one person went through multiple soldiers' identity documents and added the same thing to each. What they added is a single symbol, the circle with line from the insignia that appears across this game's lore. Drawn carefully, deliberately, on the back of each document by one hand, the person with the stamp, so to speak, was marking these soldiers as belonging to something, or documenting that they already did. Chapter 8. The technology that shouldn't exist. Easter egg 106 is about the Haven's power systems. The Haven's infrastructure requires significant power, and the power generation systems are detailed in the engineering sections of the Haven. The primary systems are what you'd expect: efficient, robust, designed for longevity. But there's a secondary power source that runs in parallel with the primary systems. It's not labelled in the Haven's engineering documentation. It's not connected to the main distribution grid in an obvious way, but the power conduits running from the sealed rooms from Easter egg 35 are connected to it. The secondary source is drawing power from somewhere that the Haven's standard engineering documentation doesn't acknowledge. It's running something in rooms that don't officially exist, off a power source that isn't described. Easter egg 107 is about the weapons. The standard Raider equipment includes weapons that are adapted from pre-Ark civilian and military technology, which makes sense given the supply chain constraints of a Haven-based society. but certain weapon configurations found in the game, particularly in the armories of more advanced Haven installations, don't have a clear lineage. They're not adaptations of pre-Arc technology. Their design principles are different. The materials used in certain components are not manufactured through any process consistent with the Haven's documented manufacturing capacity. They exist without a clear explanation of how they came to be. Someone made these weapons, and whoever made them was working from design knowledge that didn't come from pre-Arc human technology or from the Haven's industrial base. The knowledge came from somewhere else. Easter egg 108 is about the communication equipment used by the research teams referenced in Easter egg 7.3. The standard Raider communication equipment is visible throughout the game, and its design is consistent with adapted pre-Arc technology. But when you find the staging areas for the research teams, their equipment is different. The communication devices specifically are more compact, differently powered, and have design features that suggest a much more recent development than the standard equipment. These devices were made recently, with a design that's more sophisticated than what the Haven's industrial base should be capable of producing, and they're specifically calibrated based on the frequency markings visible on their controls for the frequency range identified in Easter eggs 14 and 39. The research teams are carrying equipment specifically designed to communicate with something orbital, and that equipment is new. Easter egg 109 is about Arc unit components found in the Haven's engineering sections. The Haven uses salvaged Arc material extensively, which is documented and expected, but there's a specific type of Arc component found integrated into Haven systems in ways that go beyond simple material salvage. These components are still functional. They're still operating in their Arc capacity while simultaneously integrated into Haven systems. This level of integration would require understanding Arc technology well enough to interface with it while it's active, not just stripping it for raw material. The Haven's engineering staff have, at some point, developed enough understanding of Arc technology to work with it while it's running. The documentation of this in the Haven's engineering records is conspicuously sparse. Easter egg 110 is about the scanner technology used by Raiders. The standard scanner equipment helps identify resources and threats on the surface, but if you look at the advanced scanner configurations available in the research sections of the Haven, there are scan modes that don't correspond to any resource identification or threat detection purpose. They detect something that the scanner interface labels with an alphanumeric code rather than a natural language description. Players who've used these scan modes extensively have noted that the thing they detect is present everywhere on the surface, at varying densities, with the highest densities in the areas that align with earlier location clusters from previous Easter eggs. Whatever this thing is, it's pervasive, it's everywhere. And someone built a detection mode for it deliberately. You don't build a detector for something you don't know about. Easter egg 111 is about an obsolete technology found in the Haven storage sections. Among the decommissioned equipment, there's a device whose function isn't immediately clear from its exterior. It's the size of a large backpack and has a configuration of components that suggest it was designed to be carried. In the technical documentation associated with this device, which is fragmented but readable, it's described as a projection system. But the type of projection it performs isn't light-based. The documentation refers to it as a signal projection system, designed to project a specific signal type across an extended area. The signal type it projects is in the same frequency range as the Arc communication signals from Easter egg 57. The Haven built a device at some point that could project Arc communication frequencies, either as a study tool or as something more operationally intentional. Easter egg 112 is about the agriculture technology. The Haven's grow rooms are impressive and well documented, but in one Haven's lower agricultural level, there's a grow room that's different from the others. The plants growing in it are not food crops. They're not medicinal plants. They're plants that have no obvious practical application for haven life. What they do have, based on the technical notes posted near the grow station, is a specific interaction with certain electromagnetic frequencies. The notes describe the plants as highly sensitive to a frequency band that the reader of the notes wouldn't need to consult other game documentation to recognize. It's the same band as the ARC communication signals. Someone is growing plants that respond to ARC frequencies. The plants are flourishing. Whatever they're detecting or responding to, it's present enough underground to sustain this level of growth. Easter egg 113 is about the old technology that the Haven repurposed. In the archived equipment sections, there are several devices whose original pre-ARC purpose is clear from their design. Medical imaging equipment, scientific measurement instruments, astronomical sensors. These are recognizable, but their configurations in the Haven storage are modified, not for salvage purposes. Modified while still intact, as if someone wanted to change what they detected or how they detected it. The medical imaging equipment, for example, has been tuned in a way that would shift its sensitivity away from biological tissue and toward the material composition of ARC unit casings. Someone modified pre-ARC scientific equipment to study the ARC, rather than to serve their original medical or scientific purposes. This modification predates the Haven's current administration, based on the equipment's condition and the style of the modifications. Easter egg 114 is about a specific piece of Haven equipment whose function is listed in the engineering documentation as environmental monitoring. It's installed in the walls of the Haven at regular intervals, and its outputs feed into a central monitoring station in the engineering section. If you examine the central monitoring station, the readings from these wall units are displayed in real time. Most of the readings are atmospheric, temperature, humidity, particulate levels. But one data stream from these wall units is not atmospheric, it's a signal reading. A continuous low-level signal reading that runs across all the monitoring units throughout the Haven. The reading fluctuates slightly, but never drops to zero. The Haven's walls are continuously detecting a signal, and the monitoring station has a note posted near it, handwritten, that says simply, expected. The signal is expected. Someone knows it's there and has known for long enough to call it expected. Easter egg 115 is in the weapons used by ARC units, specifically their directed energy systems. Players who've spent time studying the visual and physical effects of ARC weapons on the environment have noted something about the pattern of damage they leave. The burn patterns, the fracture geometries, the melting patterns in different material types. These damage signatures are consistent with specific energy emission profiles, consistent and precise enough that an engineer looking at the damage could backwards calculate the weapon's output parameters. Players with relevant engineering backgrounds have done exactly this and found that the output parameters implied by the damage patterns are not achievable with any energy generation technology in the known pre-ARC human technology base. The ARC weapons operate on principles that human technology had theorized but not achieved. The ARC either developed these independently, or they received the underlying physics from somewhere that was further ahead. Easter egg 116 is about a specific Haven building project that's referenced in administrative records, but never described in detail. The records reference it as the Deep Extension Project, and it appears to have been a significant infrastructure undertaking that involved deepening part of the Haven's existing structure. The project is referenced in budget allocations, in personnel assignments, and in supply requisitions. What was built in the Deep Extension is never described. The project is simply noted as complete in the administrative record, and then all references to it stop. The power conduits from Easter egg 35 run toward the area of the Haven where the Deep Extension would have been built. Whatever the extension contains, it receives power. It exists at a depth below the Haven's main structure, and the Haven's administration chose not to document what it's for. Easter egg 117 is about the medical stasis technology found in One Haven storage. Standard medical stasis for long-term preservation is a known technology in the game's timeline. But the stasis units found in the deep storage of One Haven are not standard medical stasis units. They're larger. They have additional systems that a standard medical stasis unit doesn't need, and their configuration suggests they were designed for something more than simple biological preservation. The additional systems deal with signal management, specifically signal isolation. The units are designed to preserve something biological while simultaneously isolating it from external signals. Whatever or whoever is meant to be kept in these units, they're meant to be kept quiet, kept from transmitting or receiving anything while they're in stasis, a biological entity that transmits signals. That's an interesting constraint to design around. Easter egg 118 is about how the Haven's technological development has progressed. If you track the design language of equipment across different temporal periods represented in the Haven's archive, the progression is not linear. Technology doesn't simply improve over time in a steady gradient. There are jumps, periods where the design of Haven equipment changes more significantly than the rate of development would predict. These jump periods correspond to specific events in the Haven's history, events that are referenced obliquely in the administrative record and never described directly. Something happened. Technology advanced faster than it should have. And the jump periods in Haven technology development are the same periods when the research team mission records from Easter egg 73 show increased activity. The research teams brought something back, and what they brought back accelerated the Haven's technological capability in ways that standard salvage from the surface wouldn't explain. Easter egg 119 is about navigation technology. The radar navigation systems are detailed and sophisticated for the Haven's apparent technological level. But the specific navigational references used in the system are unusual. Standard navigation uses reference points based on geographical features, established landmarks, or satellite data. The Haven's radar navigation system uses reference points that are none of these things. They're fixed reference points keyed to specific signal sources that are stationary, located at specific surface positions, and powerful enough to provide reliable navigational reference over the entire playable area. These signal sources are not Haven infrastructure. They're not pre-Arc human infrastructure. They're something positioned at the surface that the Haven's navigation system uses as reference. The navigation references are Arc emitters. The Haven's navigation runs off Arc infrastructure, and this is either something the Haven built around because it was already there, or something it chose to rely on. Easter egg 120 closes this chapter with a detail that connects to the weapons from Easter egg 107. The weapons that don't have a clear lineage, the ones with design principles that don't match the Haven's technological base, share a material in their construction with one of the components found in the sealed chambers of Arc units from Easter egg 48. The same material, used in human-made weapons and in the sealed, protected chambers of the machines those weapons are used against. One possible reading is that the Haven's engineers, having access to Arc components through salvage and research, reverse engineered that material and incorporated it into weapon construction. Another reading points towards something more unsettling, that the material's presence in both contexts isn't reverse engineering, but common origin. That the material came from the same source, used for different purposes by entities who both had access to it. Chapter 9. Signals, Codes and Hidden Transmissions. Easter egg 121 is about the constant background signal. Players using the detection mode from Easter egg 110 in different zones and at different times have mapped the signal density across the playable world. What they found is that the signal is not uniformly distributed. It has gradients, higher concentrations in some areas, lower in others. And when you map the signal density gradient across the whole playable area, it forms a shape. The high-density zones outline something. The outline is partial because the edges of the playable area cut it off, but the shape that's visible within the playable area is consistent with the edge of a very large structure, something enormous, something whose full extent lies mostly outside the current playable zones. The signal is emanating from something vast that's mostly underground. Easter egg 122 is about the radio silence. In the game's first period, when Haven communications are more active, there are occasional breaks in signal where the radio goes completely quiet. These aren't equipment failures. They're too brief and too regular for equipment failures. They're silences of precise duration, occurring on a consistent schedule. Radio operators in the Haven are experienced enough to recognize the difference between equipment silence and deliberate silence. The scheduled silences are documented in the communication logs as blackout windows. No transmissions are made during these windows. No explanation for the blackout schedule is given in the accessible documentation. Someone determined that there are specific windows of time during which the Haven should not transmit, and this determination was made early enough to be standard practice by the time the accessible logs begin. Easter egg 123 is about the number 17. It appears more than any other number across the game's accessible numerical references. 17 raider designations in the partial military roster from Easter egg 92 carry the unusual status code. The floor plans of Haven administrative sections have 17 rooms documented. The seismic monitoring data from Easter egg 17 has 17 significant impact spikes. The personal medical records with the unusual classification code from Easter egg 33 represent exactly 17% of the Haven's population in all accessible records. A number appearing this consistently across unconnected datasets is not accidental. It's either a very deliberate developer choice seeded throughout the world as a puzzle element, or it's something woven into the world's logic, a number that matters in the architecture of whatever the Ark or the Haven's founders were working with. Easter egg 124 is about the signal embedded in the Haven's light cycle. Earlier, Easter egg 37 noted that the Haven's light cycle is slightly shorter than a standard day, but there's another property of the light cycle that wasn't addressed there. The light cycle doesn't simply go from bright to dim smoothly. The transition contains variations, short flickers in the dimming and brightening phases. These flickers are very brief and easy to dismiss as power fluctuation artifacts. But if you record the light transition and analyze the flicker pattern, it has structure. It encodes information. The flickers in the morning brightening phase are different from the flickers in the evening dimming phase. Together, they form a binary data stream. What that data stream encodes is a regular, repeating signal. The Haven's light cycle is used as a transmission medium. The residents live inside a signal twice a day, and they mostly don't know it. Easter egg 125 is about a specific frequency that appears across all communication equipment in the game, regardless of the equipment's stated purpose or configuration. It appears in the background of radio equipment as a very faint trace signal. It appears in the environmental monitoring data from Easter egg 114 as one of several detected signals. It appears in the scanner detection mode from Easter egg 110, and it appears in the ARC unit communication signals analysed in Easter egg 57, specifically as a carrier frequency that underlies the more complex ARC transmissions. One frequency appears in every signal context in the game's world. It's ubiquitous. It's always there. It's in the Haven's walls, and in the ARC units, and in the air between them. Something is using this frequency as a foundation. Everything else is built on top of it. Easter egg 126 is about the content of the signal from Easter egg 124. Players who decoded the binary stream from the light cycle and translated it have found that it encodes a repeating sequence of what appear to be coordinates, not geographical coordinates in any standard system, something more abstract, numerical relationships that don't correspond to any physical coordinate system currently used or historically documented. But they're consistent, they repeat exactly, and they correspond in their numerical relationships to values that appear in the ARC unit serial numbering from Easter egg 19. The light cycle is transmitting ARC units serial numbers. Specific ones, the same ones. Twice a day, the Haven's light system encodes the serial numbers of specific ARC units, either as a tracking signal or as a response to something. The Haven's heart is beating in ARC serial numbers. Easter egg 127 is about the message in the mineral deposits. The resonant mineral from Easter egg 28, the one that ARC units seem to respond to, has a property beyond its electromagnetic resonance. In areas where it occurs in high concentration, it can act as a passive signal repeater. It absorbs certain frequencies and re-emits them at slightly altered profiles. In areas with the highest mineral concentration, the re-emitted signal profile isn't just the absorbed signal slightly altered, it carries an additional component. A component that has the structural properties identified in Easter egg 57 as consistent with language. The mineral deposits on the surface of the Earth are re-emitting something that has the structural properties of language. Something was said near enough to these deposits, long enough ago, that the mineral is still retransmitting it. The Earth itself is carrying a message that it didn't write. Easter egg 128 is about the old satellite infrastructure. On the surface, in the more open zones, there are remnants of satellite communication equipment from the pre-ARC period. Dishes, receivers, uplink facilities, most of this is non-functional. But one facility, in the highest elevation zone accessible to players, has partial power from a combination of solar collection and a small backup generator that's still running. The equipment in this facility, still partially powered, is still receiving. The signal it's receiving is continuous and structured. The facility's own readout equipment, old and analog, shows this as a continuous signal waveform. The signal is coming from orbit. It's been coming since before the ARC arrived, based on the facility's own timestamps, which haven't been reset and which predate the game's current timeline by a margin that suggests this signal has been transmitting for a very long time. Something in orbit has been talking to Earth since before the ARC came, and the satellite facility is still listening. Easter egg 129 is about the personal radios carried by some NPC characters. Some of the Haven's residents and raiders carry personal radio units as part of their standard equipment. The channel selections on these units vary by individual. Most are set to standard Haven frequencies, but a small number of individuals, observable in specific zones, have their radios set to channels that don't appear in the standard Haven communication documentation. These individuals are sometimes seen adjusting these channels during quiet periods. They're listening to something they don't discuss, and the frequencies they're tuned to, when mapped against the full frequency reference from the game's various communication lore elements, fall in the gap between known Haven frequencies and the orbital communication range. They're listening to the middle. Easter egg 130 is about what happens when multiple signals are aligned. Several of the signal sources identified across the game's lore have geographical positions. The mineral deposit re-emission from Easter egg 127. The satellite facility from Easter egg 128. The signal sources used for Haven navigation from Easter egg 119. The deposit locations of ARC unit materials from Easter egg 51. If you map all of these on a zone map and draw lines between them, the lines converge, not exactly, but closely enough that the pattern is not random. They converge on an area that corresponds to where the Deep Extension project from Easter egg 116 was built. The Haven is sitting on the convergence point of multiple signal sources. Either it was built there because of that convergence, or the convergence was built around the Haven after it was established. Easter egg 131 is about the children's radio show. In the Haven's audio media archive, there are recordings of a children's radio program produced in the Haven for Haven children. This is a practical and humane thing for a closed community to create, and the show itself is warm and carefully made. The stories it tells are simple and age-appropriate, but players who've listened carefully to the full archive of episodes have noted that a subset of the stories, distributed irregularly across the archive, contain embedded elements, phrases that, in the context of a children's story, are innocuous, but that, if extracted from the story context and placed in sequence, form a coherent set of instructions. Not instructions for children. Instructions for someone with technical knowledge of signal processing and communication systems. Someone was using a children's show to distribute technical instructions to an audience inside the Haven. Easter egg 132 is about the timing of ARC incursions. Players who've tracked the timing of ARC unit behavior patterns, specifically the congregation events from Easter egg 104, have noted that these events occur at times that correspond to specific peaks in the ambient signal from Easter egg 125. When the ubiquitous background frequency peaks in intensity, the ARC units congregate. When it normalizes, they disperse. The ARC congregation behavior is driven by the background signal. The signal is telling them when to gather. Something is scheduling ARC behavior. And the signal that does the scheduling is the same one that's present in the Haven's walls, that the monitoring station calls expected, and that the light cycle encodes. The scheduler speaks to everyone. Easter egg 133 is about the dead frequency. Among all the frequencies referenced in the game's lore, there's one that appears in documentation, but produces no active signal in any scanner or receiver. Every piece of equipment that has the capability to detect it shows it as present but empty. No content, a clear channel. Players who found this frequency in the documentation have expected to find something on it. There's nothing. But the documentation continues to reference it as if it's active, as if something should be on it. One possible reading is that this frequency was once active and is no longer. Another points toward the idea that whatever is on it is not detectable by the instruments available to players and Haven residents. The dead frequency might be the loudest one in the whole system. It might just require a different kind of ear. Easter egg 134 is about the code built into the Haven's architecture. The physical layout of the Haven, specifically the positioning of certain structural elements, certain access points, and certain support pillars, has a geometry that serves structural purposes. But the geometry also does something else. If you map the positions of specific structural elements across the Haven's floor plan and connect them by specific rules, the connections form a pattern that encodes information. These specific rules for connection aren't obvious, but players who tried different geometric approaches found one that produced a consistent, non-random pattern. The pattern, once decoded, is a set of numbers. The numbers match a subset of the coordinates from the light cycle transmission in Easter egg 126. The building is both a shelter and a message. Someone built the Haven so that its structure, if you know how to read it, tells you something. And what it tells you is part of what the light tells you twice a day. Easter egg 135 closes this chapter with the most disorienting signal detail in the game. In the archive of the Haven's communication logs, there's an entry that doesn't belong. The date on it is from after the current game timeline, not before. A communication log entry that is dated in the future. Its content is not fully readable, but the fragments that are readable describe a situation, not a location or a mission. A situation described as resolved. The log entry is filed as incoming, not outgoing. Someone sent the Haven a message from a time that hasn't happened yet, and whoever maintains the communication log filed it without comment. It's in the archive in chronological order, date and all, sitting in the log between entries from times that have already passed and the blank space of time that hasn't. The Haven is in possession of a message from after the story ends. Chapter 10. The Ones Who Stayed Above. Easter egg 136 is about the surface survivors who never came down to the Havens. The evidence of long-term surface habitation by people who chose not to or couldn't access Haven facilities is spread across the surface zones. Some of this evidence is old enough to suggest people survived for years on the surface without Haven support. The strategies visible in these long-term surface habitations are sophisticated. These are not desperate, short-term survival situations. These are communities or individuals who developed sustainable practices for living alongside the Ark on the surface. How they did this, specifically how they coexisted with the Ark for extended periods, is not documented anywhere in the Haven's records. The Haven's records don't acknowledge the surface survivors as a significant population. Either the Haven doesn't know, or the Haven chose not to know. Easter egg 137 is about a specific surface shelter that shows evidence of a very long occupation. The shelter is built into the lower level of a ruined building in a way that makes it almost invisible from outside. Whoever built it had significant architectural knowledge. The shelter is structured to minimize electromagnetic signature while maintaining habitability. The design principles are consistent with someone who understood what drew Ark attention and designed their living space specifically to avoid it. The shelter has accumulated years of living evidence. The number of notches cut into a wooden post near the entrance, apparently tracking days, suggests an occupation of over 4 years. One person or a small group lived in this precisely designed shelter for more than 4 years on the Ark-occupied surface, undetected. Easter egg 138 is about the food systems of the surface survivors. In the long-term habitation sites, there's evidence of food production strategies that go beyond simple foraging and scavenging. Container gardens, careful management of water sources, processing and preservation techniques adapted to available materials. These are not improvised. They were developed and refined over time. And they share design principles across different habitation sites in different zones, suggesting information sharing between surface survivor groups. Surface survivors were teaching each other. There's a network implied by the consistency of their practices, and that network operated without Haven infrastructure. Easter egg 139 is about the art of the surface survivors. Distinct from the military graffiti and the survivor navigation markings discussed in earlier chapters, there's a category of art in the long-term habitation sites that is purely expressive. It's not functional, it's personal and made with care and time. The images in this art set are different from anything in the Haven's art. They're not representations of memory or hope in the way Haven art tends to be. They're representations of the present, of the surface, of the Ark, and notably, they're not representations of conflict or fear. They're observational. Someone living on the surface for years was making art about the Ark, the way a naturalist makes art about an ecosystem. Detailed, patient, curious. These artists weren't afraid. They were watching. Easter egg 140 is about the language of the long-term surface survivors. The navigation and communication system from Easter egg 76 is one layer of surface communication. But in the habitation sites of long-term survivors, there's an additional system, more complex, more expressive. It uses the same geometric foundation as the basic surface language, but extends it with additional symbol combinations that allow for more nuanced communication. Players who've studied both systems have noted that the advanced system is capable of expressing concepts that the basic system isn't. Concepts like trust, duration, and intention. The surface survivors developed a language system that could carry meaning across time and distance. Marks left by someone months ago, readable by someone who comes later, capable of conveying something more than just direction or warning. The surface developed culture. Easter egg 141 is about the medical knowledge of the surface survivors. In the habitation sites, there are medical supplies and treatments that weren't sourced from Haven facilities. They were developed from surface materials. The treatments documented in the notes left at these sites address archae-specific injuries and conditions that Haven medicine also addresses, but the approaches are different, more naturalistic, using materials found on the surface itself, and more effective, based on the outcome notes in the survivors' own records, than several equivalent Haven medical approaches. The surface survivors independently developed medical treatments for arc-related conditions that are in some ways superior to what the Haven developed. Knowledge developed outside the Haven, in direct contact with the problem, outperformed knowledge developed inside the Haven, insulated from it. Easter egg 142 is about a discovery that certain surface survivors made regarding arc units. In the notes left in habitation sites, there are references to arc units behaving differently in proximity to specific individuals, not avoiding them exactly, more like not registering them, treating their presence as a non-event when they should, by all normal behavior logic, be alerting. The survivors who noted this phenomenon describe it as something that certain people simply have and others don't. They don't claim to understand it. They just observe it and work around it, placing these individuals in roles that require close arc proximity, a natural quality in some humans that the arc doesn't respond to. Whatever that quality is, it's not discussed anywhere in Haven medical or biological documentation. The Haven doesn't know this exists. Easter egg 143 is about the relationship between the long-term surface survivors and the arc congregation sites from Easter egg 104. The habitation sites are never located near these congregation sites, which is expected, but they're always located with sightlines to them. The surface survivors positioned themselves with views of the congregation sites. They were watching them regularly. The notes in the habitation sites reference congregation events repeatedly and with descriptive detail that suggests extended observation. Someone living on the surface for years was watching the ark congregate and keeping records of what they saw. Those records, in the portion still readable, describe changes in the congregation behaviour over time. The ark's behaviour at these sites evolved. It became more complex, more organised. The surface survivors watched this evolution happen. Easter egg 144 is about a specific signal that surface survivors use to communicate with each other across distance. In several elevated locations near habitation sites, there are remnants of a light-based communication system. Mirrors, reflective surfaces positioned at specific angles, capable of directing focused light signals across the terrain. This is a low-technology solution that the arc appears not to respond to, unlike radio transmissions. But the reflective positions form a network, a mirror network across the surface zone, allowing communication between habitation sites without electromagnetic emission. Players who've mapped the full network have noted that it extends in directions that lead outside the current playable zone. The surface survivor communication network connects to somewhere off-map. There are either more habitation sites beyond the playable area, or the network connects to something else entirely. Easter egg 145 is about what the surface survivors knew about the Haven. The notes in the habitation sites reference the Haven, but not in the way you'd expect from people who chose to live on the surface rather than seek Haven shelter. They reference the Haven as a known entity with known characteristics. They know about Haven administrative policies. They know about specific personnel. They know operational details of Haven raider deployments. This knowledge, in people who never entered the Haven, came from somewhere, either from raiders who maintained contact with surface survivors, or from someone inside the haven who was communicating outward. The surface survivors were being kept informed about haven operations by someone in a position to provide that information. Easter egg 146 is about the children born on the surface. There's evidence in some of the habitation sites that children were raised there. Not briefly, but from birth. Children who were born after the collapse, who never knew anything but the surface. The materials left for and by these children are some of the most striking in the game. Their drawings are entirely of their world. The Ark is not the frightening intrusion in their art that it is in Haven art. In surface-born children's drawings, the Ark is part of the landscape, alongside trees and buildings and people. Normal. The surface-born children weren't socialized to be afraid of the Ark, and the notes from adults in these communities suggest this wasn't an accident. The children were deliberately not taught fear. The adults had a reason to raise children who could exist without fear in the presence of Ark units. That reason isn't stated. Easter egg 147 is about the approach to death among the surface survivors. In the long-term habitation sites, there are burial practices visible, or at least the evidence of burial. Surface survivors develop their own rituals around death, as communities do. These rituals, inferred from the evidence left in habitation sites, differ from haven practices in one specific way. Haven burials and memorials are oriented toward the community, toward memory and continuity. Surface survivor burial practices are oriented outward. The grave markers, where they still exist, face away from the habitation, away from the Ark congregation sites, away from the haven. They face a specific direction that, across multiple sites in multiple zones, is consistent. The same bearing. Whatever the surface survivors were facing their dead toward, it was the same thing everywhere. Something that they considered worth facing, even in death. Easter egg 148 is about music again, because it keeps appearing as a theme. In the habitation sites there are instruments, improvised ones, made from available materials but recognizable as instruments. And in several habitation sites there are transcribed musical compositions, written down in whatever notational system the transcriber had access to. These compositions share a musical quality that's distinct from Haven music, from pre-Ark recordings, from the Soldier's Song in Easter egg 100. They're slower, more repetitive, more drone-like. Players with musical backgrounds have described them as similar to certain meditation traditions of long-duration monotony. The surface survivor music is designed for a state of sustained patient attention. Music for watching, music for waiting, music for people who were doing something that required that state for years. Easter egg 149 is about the message left at the largest habitation site. This site is more structured than the others. It's clearly a community rather than an individual or small group. It shows evidence of intentional design, of governance practices, of organised resource management, and at its centre, in the most protected and maintained space of the entire site, there's a document. It's in the advanced surface survivor language from Easter egg 140, which requires the knowledge of that language to read. Players who have decoded enough of the surface language to attempt a reading of this document have produced translations that, while incomplete, suggest the document is a statement of purpose. A reason for being on the surface, articulated in the language developed on the surface for people of the surface. The key phrase that appears in multiple players' partial translations, despite differences in approach, is something that reads as, "We are here to receive what comes." Easter egg 150 closes this chapter, and it's the one that makes every other detail in this chapter feel different on retrospect. In the largest habitation site, there are markings on the floor of the central space. These are made with deliberate care, using a dark material applied precisely. The pattern on the floor is a large-scale version of the spiral motif from Easter egg 72, the one that 6 different Haven artists independently created. The same open spiral rendered large enough to stand in. And at the centre of this spiral, at the point where a closed spiral centre would be, there's a single object. A small piece of metal, worked into a shape. The shape is the same circle with line symbol from Easter eggs 23, 62, and 95 and 105. The surface survivors, in the centre of their community's most important space, have placed the symbol of the organisation that has been continuous through the entire timeline of this game's lore. The surface survivors and the Haven's embedded faction and the pre-arc organisation are not separate things. They've always been one thing. Chapter 11. The Final Pieces. Easter egg 151 is about a room that's easy to miss in the Haven because it's marked as maintenance access. Beyond the maintenance label, it doesn't look like anything. Pipes, conduits, nothing remarkable. But if you move through it entirely, which most players don't because there's no obvious reward for doing so, the back wall has something on it. Not graffiti, not a mural, a mathematical derivation. Worked out in pencil, directly on the wall, in handwriting that's small and precise. The derivation is long and complex. Players with mathematics backgrounds have described it as a calculation of the intersection period of two orbital bodies based on a specific set of initial conditions. The initial conditions, the numbers used in the calculation, correspond to values that appear across the signal data from earlier chapters. Someone was calculating when two orbiting objects would be in the same place at the same time. And based on the answer written at the bottom of the derivation, that time has already passed. Easter egg 152 is about the sealed chambers in arc units again, but from a different angle. In later game areas, arc units that have been heavily damaged in very specific ways that target the protective architecture of the sealed chamber without destroying it entirely, show the chambers in a compromised but potentially viewable state. Players who've achieved this specific damage state and positioned themselves to look into the compromised chamber have reported seeing something. Descriptions vary in detail because the view angle and the damage state affect visibility. But the consistent elements across multiple player reports are a small object, roughly spherical, that appears to be emitting a faint light, and a quality of the light that multiple players independently describe as pulsing, at the rate of a heartbeat. The sealed chambers protect something small, spherical, light-emitting, and alive pulsing. Whether that thing is biological, technological, or something that doesn't fit neatly into either category, the descriptions don't resolve. Easter egg 153 is about the Haven administrator from Easter egg 70, the one with the carefully assembled reading list about non-human communication. In one corner of this administrator's room, there's a small framed text that most players read as a personal quote or motto. It's short. It reads, "The answer was always in the asking." This could be purely aphoristic, but given the context of this person's library and their apparent project, it reads differently. If this administrator was working on how to communicate with the Ark, and if they found something, the idea that the answer was in the asking suggests that the act of attempting communication was itself the answer, that reaching out produced something. And the detail that makes this particular Easter egg different from an inspirational quote is this. The frame around the text has been carved into by what looks like the same hand that wrote the derivation in Easter egg 151 with the number 17. Easter egg 154 is about the relationship between the Haven's sealed rooms and the underground sounds described in Easter egg 80. The sounds from below, heard by surface survivors in different locations on the surface, are consistent in their description as rhythmic and responsive. The sealed rooms in the Haven, powered by an unknown secondary source and located in the Haven's deepest section near the deep extension, are in the right position to be the source of something that could be heard from the surface, attenuated and distorted by distance, but still present. The Haven's sealed rooms are doing something. The surface survivors heard it from above. The Haven's residents don't discuss it. The geographic relationship between the sealed rooms and the surface positions where the sounds were heard places the source of those sounds, if they originated underground, directly below the haven's deepest section. The haven's basement is talking. Something up above was answering. Easter egg 155 is about the arc unit's behavior in proximity to the haven's location. On the surface directly above the haven, arc unit behavior is measurably different from their behavior in other zones. Their patrol coverage of this area is denser. The congregation events from Easter egg 104 occur more frequently in this zone than in any other. The silence behavior from Easter egg 90 is more pronounced here. The arc units are paying more attention to the area above the haven than to almost anywhere else on the surface. Either they know the haven is below, which has significant implications for the haven's long-term safety, or they're responding to whatever is in the haven's sealed rooms, which has a completely different set of implications. The arc are drawn here. They don't attack here in the way they attack elsewhere. They congregate, they're quiet, they're present, and the haven in its deepest rooms is doing something they respond to. Easter egg 156 is about the mission status unknown individuals from Easter egg 67. In the haven's personal effects storage, items belonging to missing individuals are held according to standard procedure. The items belonging to the status unknown individuals, those with the unusual classification, are stored separately from the standard missing persons effects. They're in a section of storage that's adjacent to the research team staging area. The items in this section are more unusual than typical personal effects. They include technical documentation, personal communication logs, and in one case, a personal scanner unit, whose data storage hasn't been cleared. The data on this scanner shows scan readings from a location that's below the playable surface area, below the surface, below the depth where any radar operation is documented to have gone. Someone with a status unknown classification was below the surface, scanning something, and then was just status unknown. Easter egg 157 is about the open spiral from Easter egg 72 and 150. It appears one more time in a location that players rarely visit, the underside of the floor panels in the haven's deepest accessible section. Painted on the concrete, small enough that you'd only see it if you were looking from below, is the open spiral. Multiple spirals, actually, arranged in a pattern, clustered around the area of the sealed rooms. The spirals are painted from below, which means someone was in a space below the lowest accessible haven floor, looking up and painting on the ceiling of that space. There are spaces below the haven that are not accessible to players, spaces that someone was in, painting spirals on the ceiling in the direction of the sealed rooms above them. And the spirals are open. They don't close, they reach toward the center and stop. Easter egg 158 is about the arc's oldest behavior, observed in its rarest form. In one zone, accessible only through a specific sequence of movements that players discovered through extended exploration, there's a location where a single arc unit of a type not found anywhere else in the game stands completely still. It has apparently been there for a very long time, based on the environmental material accumulated on its casing. It faces the direction identified in Easter egg 58 as the consistent bearing of all dormant arc units. It does not respond to player presence at any range or with any provocation. It just stands. And very occasionally, at intervals measured in real-world minutes rather than game time, it emits a single, brief signal pulse. Not a communication signal, not a combat signal. A single pulse on the carrier frequency from Easter egg 125. A single pulse on the ubiquitous frequency that underlies everything. It's been doing this, apparently, for as long as it's been standing there, alone, pulsing, once, waiting. Easter egg 159 is about the document in the sealed room that one player reached through a geometry exploit in an older build of the game, before a patch closed the access point. This player captured footage and made notes before the access was removed. The document they found was photographed and transcribed. Its contents are now part of the community's lore record, even though it's no longer accessible in the current build. What the document described in partial and technical language was a project involving both Ark technology and Haven infrastructure deliberately. Not a defensive project, not a study project. A project involving Ark units and Haven residents in what the document called mutual configuration. The project had a name. The name was given as the same frequency. The project was apparently ongoing at the time the document was written, and the document was in a room that the Haven's official record says doesn't exist. Easter egg 160 is about the number that ends the mathematical derivation from Easter egg 151. The calculation determines when two orbital bodies coincide. The answer at the bottom of the wall is a specific date, written in a calendar format that's consistent with the pre-Ark dating system. That date is not in the past relative to the game's implied present. It's in the game's future, close enough to be relevant and far enough away to be uncertain. Someone calculated that two orbital bodies will be in the same position at a specific upcoming time. Whatever those two bodies are, whatever their coincidence means, someone in the Haven cared enough about this moment to work it out on a maintenance room wall and then apparently leave it there for whoever found it next. The calculation was made. The answer was stored. The date is coming. Easter egg 161 is about the children born in the Haven. Earlier, the surface-born children's fearlessness in Easter egg 146 was discussed. The children born in the Haven are different. They're born into safety and structure and limitation. Their art is different. Their understanding of the world is different. But there's one way in which Haven-born children in the later periods of the game's timeline are similar to surface-born children. Their responses to Ark sounds. In play areas of the Haven, when the ambient signal from outside the Haven is particularly strong, the younger Haven-born children sometimes stop what they're doing and orient toward the wall nearest the signal source. They don't look afraid, they look attentive. Something in the signal that adults find to be background noise is being noticed by children who can't yet explain what they're noticing. They just turn toward it, and sometimes they hum. Easter egg 162 is about the light in the sealed chambers of Ark units from Easter egg 152. Players have noted that the pulsing of the light in those chambers correlates, in timing, with the pulse from the solitary Ark unit in Easter egg 158. The single Ark unit standing alone in an inaccessible zone pulses on the carrier frequency at a specific interval. The light in the sealed chambers of other Ark units pulses at the same interval. Everything that pulses in the Ark pulses together. The system is synchronized. Whatever the sealed chambers contain, they're not independent, they're connected, networked. The pulse moves across all of them simultaneously, from the oldest unit standing alone to the newest units in active combat zones. The pulse is the same. Something in the Ark is thinking, if that's the right word, in a synchronized rhythm. And that rhythm matches the heartbeat description from Easter egg 152. Easter egg 163 is about the phrase from Easter egg 45, the one being said quietly every night in the Haven. The door will be where the door was. Earlier it was presented as mysterious and unattributed, but there's a connection that's only visible in aggregate. The phrase appears once in a piece of documentation from the Remnant period, the pre-Haven founding group from Easter egg 71. The Remnant document, the partially damaged one, that records the editing of founding history, has a fragment at its very edge, the last readable fragment before the damage becomes total, that contains this phrase, not attributed, just written. The door will be where the door was. Whatever the door is, the Remnant knew about it, and someone in the Haven has been saying it quietly every night since. Easter egg 164 is about what the Ark is looking for. This is the question that all of the preceding Easter eggs point toward without resolving. But there's a detail that, when added to everything else, starts to shape an answer. In the ARC unit behaviour records, the congregation sites, the patrol routes tracing old architecture, the material deposits, the response to specific minerals, and the behaviour above the haven, one geographic principle emerges. The ARC's activity is most concentrated not in areas of highest human population, not in areas of highest resource concentration, not in areas of tactical value. It's concentrated in areas of highest signal convergence. The ARC are drawn to where the signals meet. The signals come from many sources, human and non-human, and they converge in certain places, and in those places, the ARC gather. They're not hunting, they're listening. They came here to listen. Easter egg 165 is about the device from Easter egg 111, the signal projection system that projects ARC communication frequencies. In the decommissioned equipment section where it was found, there's a detail that wasn't mentioned before. It's been used. The power cell is depleted in a way that suggests discharge rather than simple age degradation. Something drained it. It projected its signal. The device was built to project ARC frequencies, was, at some point activated, projected whatever it was meant to project, and was then placed in decommissioned storage, as if it had served its purpose, as if its purpose was a one-time thing. The Haven built a device to project ARC communication frequencies, used it exactly once, and then put it away. One possible reading is that the device was used to send a signal, a specific signal, one time, to something that was listening, and whatever it sent, and whether whatever was listening answered, is the last unanswered question in this chain. Easter egg 166 is about the colour of the light in the sealed chambers. Earlier, it was described as faint, but players who've seen it, and whose descriptions I have read in detail, consistently mention the colour. Not as a primary observation, but as an afterthought, because it's subtle. It's not white. It's not the blue or orange of ARC unit operational lighting. It's a colour that sits between green and gold, a warm, slightly biological colour. And this is where that detail points. In the Haven's medical section,